Good morning, Commissioners, Chief Randolph, Mr. Sibley, Madam Secretary, Acting Inspector General Florence Hugh, Mr. City Attorney Carlos De La Guerra, and members of the public. Today is Tuesday, February 4th, 2025. It is 9:30 a.m. This is a regular meeting of the Los Angeles Board of Police Commissioners. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Good morning. Please let the record reflect Commissioners Suthers, Shields, and Sanchez-Gordon are present, and we have a quorum, Mr. President.
Thank you. We welcome everyone attending this morning. The Police Commission is committed to ensuring equal access to its meetings. It is requested that individuals who require the services of a translator contact the Board Secretary no later than the day preceding the meeting. Whenever possible, a translator will be provided. Sign language interpreters, assistive listening devices, or other auxiliary aids and/or services may be provided upon request. To ensure availability, you are advised to make your request at least 72 hours prior to the meeting you wish to attend. All public comment will be heard during item number 2 on the agenda. We will dedicate a total of 45 minutes to public comment. Members of the public will have 1 minute per agenda item for a maximum of 2 minutes total. At the request of the speaker will be given 1 additional minute for general public comment for a maximum of 3 minutes total. The order of speakers will be a speaker in the room will go first, then we will take a speaker watching today's meeting on Zoom. We will alternate between the speakers in the room and Zoom for a total of 45 minutes. Members of the public who participate in public comment are reminded that they can speak to any item on the agenda or a matter within the jurisdiction of the Board of Police Commissioners. Public comment is your opportunity to address the Board. You are free to express your opinions on matters before the Board and to generally express when you disagree with other opinions expressed. However, directing your comments to other individuals who have spoken or attacking others who have expressed their opinions shall be deemed off-topic, and your public comment period will be concluded. Members of the public, if you choose to participate in the public comment portion of the agenda, you can participate in this meeting in a number of ways outlined on the agenda. Message for those attending the meeting in person. These meetings are regular meetings between the Board, the Department, and key stakeholders. Meetings of the Board of Police Commissioners are open to the public. The state's Ralph M. Brown Act affords the public the opportunity to be present at the meetings, hear the presentations and dialogue in real time, and provide feedback via the public comment period. During these meetings, there's a need for the Board to carry out public business expeditiously without delays or disruptions. Members of the audience shall not engage in any conduct which causes an actual disruption of the meeting. Those attending in person are reminded that disruptive behavior will be cause for removal. If you disrupt this meeting, you will be provided with only 1 warning to cease disruptive behavior. If you fail to cease such behavior, you will be removed from the meeting. All attendees must be seated. Failure to follow this rule will result in a warning and/or removal from the meeting. With that, we move to item number 1, the report of the Chief of Police. Chief Randolph.
Good morning, Mr. President. It's an honor to be here before you and the rest of the group here. And good morning to the public. Good to be before you. As Chief McDonald does every week, I'll be discussing significant events from the previous week, providing a crime update, and discussing our personnel strength. I'll note that we had no officer-involved shootings or categorical uses of force during the previous week. Year to date, we've had 2 officer-involved shootings in comparison to 3 this same time last year, for a reduction of 33%. I'd like to talk about the Palisades fire, if you'll allow me. Over the past week, we've continued to dedicate resources to the Palisades fire area while working to gradually return officers to normal patrol operations. Due to ongoing deployment needs, the city has remained on tactical alert. Each day, we assess the situation alongside our city partners to determine when and where we can safely reopen the areas of the Palisades and reallocate resources. As of February 3rd, 2025, PCH has reopened to the public with a single lane open in each direction. However, with the rain in the forecast, conditions remain subject to change based on safety assessments. And in fact, today at 1500 hours, we'll be limiting that to just emergency workers. And that's per Caltrans. So that's been updated. And we anticipate that'll be open, or I'm sorry, it will be closed with what they call a soft closure through perhaps Friday, depending on how the rain goes. But we are expecting some water and debris flow across PCH, causing a safety hazard. The National Guard is maintaining checkpoints to ensure that only residents can enter those restricted areas along PCH, and the CHP is also assisting on those checkpoints and supporting our overall crime suppression efforts. The LAPD continues to maintain a crime suppression detail in the Palisades along with CHP to ensure public safety. We urge those, however, that do not reside in that area to please stay out as we work towards a safe and structured reopening. I'd like to talk about yesterday's immigration protest that we all saw probably on TV and we handled in person. On Sunday, February 2nd, we had approximately 3,000 demonstrators that gathered downtown for a protest regarding immigration. Throughout that day, a group periodically splintered into smaller fractions, moving through the Civic Center and surrounding streets before reconvening in front of City Hall. Vehicle convoys also participated with drivers waving flags and circling the area. At about 12 p.m. on that day, a large group entered the 101 freeway and the California Highway Patrol was notified and responded. While many protesters returned to City Hall, others remained at key intersections, and approximately 300 demonstrators stayed on the freeway while another 600 gathered on adjacent sidewalks and overpasses. The LAPD coordinated with CHP to clear the freeways and deploying officers to redirect the groups. Protesters splintered again, and then some occupying the 6th Street Bridge and others returned to City Hall. At approximately 5:20 p.m., CHP officers initiated a help call after being struck by thrown objects, and an unlawful assembly was declared. LAPD deployed a mobile field force to clear the area, and following dispersal, a smaller group reassembled, at Cesar Chavez Avenue and Alameda Street, requiring a second mobile field force deployment. The crowd was eventually dispersed without further escalation. Incident summary from that event was we had 5 officers sustain minor injuries. We had, as far as use of force, we had 3 rounds of 37 millimeter and 5 rounds of 40 millimeter that were deployed on the crowd. And we had some arrests. We had 1 felony vandalism arrest for damage to an MTA bus. We had 1 arrest for assault with a deadly weapon when this person threw objects at officers. We had 4 vandalism reports for police officer vehicle damage, which included slashed tires. And we had 1 crime report for pointing a laser at officers. So now fast forwarding to yesterday's event, yesterday's protest. At approximately 9 a.m., a group began gathering in front of City Hall to protest regarding immigration. And by 10:15, the group initiated a march with approximately 600 demonstrators. At approximately 12:25 hours, members of the marching group began vandalizing property and spray paint along Figueroa Street between Temple Street and Cesar Chavez Avenue. As the group continued towards City Hall, splinter groups began breaking away, and by 1:10 p.m., the group size had increased to approximately 800 pedestrians and 200 vehicles. Some individuals climbed freeway signs at LA Street and the 101 freeway, prompting grave safety concerns, as you might imagine. By 2:15 p.m., demonstrators had breached the barriers at City Hall and continued to vandalize the area. Half an hour later at 14:45 or 2:45 p.m., protesters began conducting vehicle burnouts and setting off fireworks along Spring Street between First Street and Temple Street. That crowd size had grown between 800 and 1,000 individuals. At approximately 3:30, the incident commander requested additional resources. As yesterday progressed, that crowd grew in size and became unruly. And by 4:45, projectiles were being thrown at officers at Aliso Street and Main Street. A dispersal order was issued in both English and Spanish from our airship, our air unit, our helicopter, and a sound truck. And by 5:30 p.m., additional projectiles were reported near Spring and Aliso, and fireworks were being directed at the officers. In response, our incident commander authorized the use of less lethal munitions, and tactical support elements along with mobile field forces began moving the crowd northbound on Main Street towards Cesar Chavez Avenue. As officers attempted to clear the area, individuals continued to throw objects at them. Throughout the evening, late into last night, officers monitored multiple groups of pedestrians, cyclists, and vehicles protesting in the downtown area, particularly along Spring Street, LA Street, Main Street, and Alameda Street. Our partners at CHP maintained a blocking force on the 101 freeway ramps, preventing multiple attempts by protesters to enter the freeway. By 8:30 p.m. last night, two groups of approximately 80 to 100 people remained blocking roadways at Cesar Chavez Avenue and Alameda Street, as well as at Main Street and Temple Street. By 9:30 p.m., one group was moved into the tunnel east of Alameda Street and Cesar Chavez, and then they were contained. This group was eventually released in pairs after being field identified and issued warnings on our officers' body-worn video. No arrests or citations were issued at this culminating event. An incident summary of yesterday's events included two of our officers sustaining minor injuries. We, as far as uses of force, we used 4 rounds of 37 millimeter and 12 rounds of 40 millimeter during the crowd dispersal. And we had 2 reports, one, an assault with a deadly weapon on a police officer report, and one vandalism report for police vehicle damage. The Los Angeles Police Department fully recognizes and respects the rights of individuals to peacefully protest and express their views. However, when demonstrations escalate into unlawful behavior, such as vandalism, violence, and threats to public safety, much like I described, the department will take decisive action to restore our order. Acts that endanger the community or our officers and the city will not be tolerated. The LAPD remains committed to ensuring a safe environment for all, and we will continue to respond appropriately to protect the rights and safety of everyone in Los Angeles. I worked late last night, much like my partner command officers, and I'm extraordinarily proud of the men and women of the Los Angeles Police Department and what I saw on television and what I was getting from our incident commander. They've worked tirelessly on the fire response and then transitioned into this event, and was pleased to see the professionalism out there and the pause, if you will. And we're also grateful to the CHP for helping us out to get through what could be described as a tense time yesterday. As far as crimes, for the week ending of February 1st, we've seen an overall decrease in crime across the city. Over the past 4 weeks, from January 5 through February 1st, combined persons and property crimes have declined by 12.7% compared to the prior 4-week period, with persons crimes down 5.9% and property crimes down 14.5%. Year-to-date, our homicides have decreased by 25% compared to 2024, and victims shot have decreased citywide by 38.7% year-to-date. It's extraordinary. Aggravated assaults have declined by 11% citywide over the past 4 weeks, and meanwhile, robberies have risen by 6.6% compared to the prior 4-week period. There is no significant pattern or trend identified in the robberies, and they will continue to be monitored. Burglaries have decreased significantly by 33.6% over the last 4 weeks. Residential burglaries are down 32.7%. Non-residential burglaries have declined by 34.2%. Our motor vehicle thefts have risen by 4.4% in the last 4 weeks, with Van Nuys, 77th Street, Southwest, and Northeast areas experiencing the most significant increases. There have been no significant trends or patterns identified as to this slight increase. While we are seeing progress in reducing overall crime, we continue to monitor emerging trends and direct resources where needed to ensure public safety. And finally, as far as our personnel strength, as of yesterday, February 3rd, our sworn personnel are at 8,785. Civilian personnel is at 2,673, and our reserve officers are holding at 380. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Chief. Chief, just to circle back on the Palisades reclosure, that's happening today, and is there any information about how long that's going to stay in place?
Caltrans estimates were that it would stay in place most likely through Friday, depending on how much debris, if any. I say if any, I think they are absolutely anticipating debris flow onto PCH that will occur. Perhaps even without a great deal of significant rain, but I think they are estimating a significant amount of rain, and I think they're holding that soft closure that they call it through Friday. And we'll continue to update our partners at Caltrans and our county partners. We're going to be in constant contact with them and assessing what's going on, and we'll update the public when we get a firmer reopen date and time.
Okay, thank you. I'll now open it up for questions and comments from my fellow commissioners. Vice President Shields.
Thank you, President Southers, and thank you, Chief Randolph, for the report. A couple of observations and questions. One, it is disappointing to see that after the tragedy that the city has already faced with the fires and the stretched resources, that people are co-opting what should have been peaceful protests and turning them into unlawful demonstrations and throwing things against police officers, especially in light of the policies of both this department and the city to try to protect everyone in the city. So thank you for all of the officers that are out there trying to control those protesters that are not following the law. And again, I think there's many people who are sympathetic with some of the messaging at the protests, but not taking it to that degree. So thank you for the restraint shown there. With regards to the some of the crime statistics, one concern that I have is, given the tactical alert that is in place, there are people that have suffered crimes but are calling in and can't actually get service, so they're not getting a police report on file. So that could potentially deflate the number of crimes that are actually being committed. And in particular, I've had someone contact me who had their home burglarized. They came home and after being out and found their home vandalized and items stolen, things like that. And unfortunately, when they called the 911, there was no one able to come out to take a report. And I believe the online reporting does not allow for reporting of burglaries. Is there a way to do something about that so that people can make timely and quick reports to the department, even while the department's under some type of tactical alert? We don't want people to be discouraged from reporting these types of crimes that are occurring to them, and the loss of security that they feel, and then having the department say that they can't respond is almost doubly problematic.
Vice President Shields, I appreciate first of all, thank you. To address your first comment, I appreciate it, and I know the men and women of the Los Angeles Police Department, and they're listening, they're watching. They are appreciative of your recognition of their tireless and professional acts. I can tell you that, now addressing your question of what is the public to do under these circumstances when we're under tactical alert, I'll first comment that we are daily assessing the status in which if we should remain in tactical alert. And we are on the cusp of releasing that restriction that allows us to be a little bit more keenly aware of our resources and deploy them appropriately. That could happen as early as today. I would say to members of the public that are interested in, they found that they are the subject of a burglary, for example, like the example that you exampled, and they call 911, they're not getting the answer, that, you know, they don't know who to turn to, I would say that they would most appropriately turn to their local police department. They're the closest one that patrols their area. For example, if they're in the Palisades area and they find themselves a victim, they would contact the West Los Angeles area community police station, and they would absolutely come out and conduct a preliminary investigation on their burglary.
Thank you. And to the extent that we can look at potentially opening up more opportunities for online reporting, particularly in times when our resources are stretched thin, I think that would be welcomed. And I'll wait for Chief
The
McDonald.
real chief, okay, right.
Morning, Chief.
Morning, Chief. And I think Chief Randolph got the easy question. I'm going to be giving you a harder question and apologize as you're just sitting down. But, you know, unfortunately, we have seen in the news recently. All right.
Excuse me, Commissioner Shields, excuse me. Ma'am with the hat, do not disrupt the speakers up here. One person is going to speak at a time.
You can't make this up.
Thank you. Commissioner Shields, go ahead.
Yes. So unfortunately, we've seen again in the news that a member of the department has been arrested for a crime, and I understand these are just, you know, allegations at this point. I want to have an understanding, without getting into the details of this particular incident, you know, the steps the department takes when something like this happens, and then also at some point, whether there's some type of report that we are presented with that discusses how the department handles when an officer is convicted of a crime, and particularly DUI, domestic violence, and making sure that the department is taking adequate steps to deal with these issues so that the department understands that that they are not above the law, especially, and how impactful and problematic it is to maintain the trust of the community when we have people who are committing crimes.
Thank you for the question. Certainly, it's taken very seriously. In this case, we're working closely with the Tustin Police Department and the Orange County District Attorney's Office. The case will be pursued criminally, and we will then monitor that as it goes, as we move forward. There are now issues as of 2 years ago with state law being changed, and the certification of the individual then being examined. Do they retain the ability to be a police officer after an incident of DUI, 2 DUIs? In a case like this, where there was a fatality, certainly he'll work his way through the system, but that's a criminal filing against somebody, so we have a procedure in place to be able to follow up on that.
And maybe I'll ask the acting inspector general, do you also track kind of how the department handles DUI situations and kind of the discipline that's associated with those types of complaints?
Commissioner, the Inspector General routinely receives updates from Professional Standards Bureau with respect to DUI complaints or incidents within the department, and our office monitors every single one, including reviewing the complaints involving the individuals to make sure that the investigation is thorough and fair. With respect to tracking it towards post, we also receive updates with respect to how many cases are sent to post and the aftermath of those investigations by post.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Clanche.
Thank you, President Southers. Chief, I also want to underscore the appreciation for the calm and restraint of the officers. I watched some of it on TV. It's unfortunately very sad to have the officers have to like stand there and take abuse from folks that weren't even part of the organized protest. So I just want to again, appreciate their calm, the strength, and the fact that they just stood there and took it as part of an effort to, keep calm in the city. But I also think that when arrests are appropriate, I'm glad that those arrests were made. I mean, I saw, donuts by, cars that actually create dangerous situation for just bystanders. So I would really appreciate you being able to share this appreciation from the commission for the officers.
Thank you.
The other thing I wanted to bring up, unfortunately, you were ill last week. I think that just a report back on the Latino Forum that your office organized. We had over 30 organizations that participated in a very important conversation to learn about what the department is doing. We had groups like Caresen, Salef, COFAM, all these different groups that, and Latino leaders from across the city. Some of the things that they brought up that I thought that the commission would like to hear back about is one of the recommendations was to post information, the Know Your Rights information on our website to make that easy for folks to navigate in Spanish. And then also they brought up how many followers the LAPD HQ Instagram site has, and it would be important to post it there. They're doing a lot of outreach on their own, but they also feel hearing the same information from law enforcement adds another level of legitimacy and credibility about the fact that LAPD will not ask about immigration. So that's a recommendation. The other thing that they brought up, which I thought was really important, was they wanted information, and I think will be a request that I will make, information about potential loss of funding if President Trump decides to cut grant funding. We know that that's something he initiated, took back. So from my own, experience and education as being here as a commission member, I know that the majority of the operations comes from the city, but we do have a lot of grant funding for instance, human trafficking and other projects that we're working on. So I would request some sort of report on potential loss of any federal grants and what the impact would be to the department if we lost some of these key grants that we get from the federal government. I know we have a few COPS grants and other grants, so I would make that recommendation. And then lastly, I would also recommend and request that our senior lead officers in key areas and key divisions to host Know Your Rights information sessions so that, we met with the community, but with the community leaders, but I think now we have to set up, and I would say on Zoom would be great, to have these Know Your Rights sessions conducted by senior lead officers in key divisions, so I would request that. Just, I wanted to share that information. I'm sure you got a report back, but I know that not, I'm reporting back also to my fellow commissioners. But thank you for organizing that. I think that a follow-up would be great once we have some clear, course of action. I recommended that the group meet once a month. These are amazing leaders across the city that care about the immigrant community. So a once-a-month Zoom I recommended so that we could stay connected to this group and kind of have a pulse on what their needs are. So I'd be happy to work with you on that.
Thank you. Just a point of clarification on the federal grants. We can give you a list of all federal grants we get. To be speculative at this point to know what the administration's going to continue to fund and what they may not continue to fund. I think if we were wait some period of time, we'd get a better read on that.
No, yeah, so a list with like the amounts. I mean, we don't know what's gonna happen, but at least we would know what potentially can happen if we knew like what our grants were.
Okay, sure,
That would be great. Thank you.
sure.
Thank you, President Southern.
Of course. Commissioner Garcia.
None at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Sanchez Gordon.
Yes, good afternoon. And everyone. I have a couple of questions regarding the immigration protest. The first one on the 2nd of February, and then the one last night. Assistant Chief Randolph did, I think, very thoroughly go over the important points of those two protests. And I too, before I ask the questions, I too want to acknowledge the service of the LAPD and the restraint and the calm, really, that occurred in the city. For the protesters, this is a very important topic. It's not going to be the last of what you saw yesterday. And I think that if our officers continue to prepare for the real protesters and also taking into consideration some of the disruptors, I think we're going to continue with a calm, and I thank them and I appreciate their service. I have some questions about the protest on the 2nd of February. Some numbers were given, 200 at certain times, 300, 600 at a certain time. But do you happen to know the estimated total number of protesters for February 2nd?
I don't off the top of my head. I heard a variety of different assessments on that too, but I can get back to you on what the overall crowd numbers were.
Okay, I think we all turned on the TV and saw a lot of activity on the streets, and I think for the most part, 99% of them were there for a purpose and a mission and to hear their voices, and I think that that happened, but I think we always have to be aware of some of those that come in and disrupt. I was told that there was one arrest, the use of a deadly weapon arrest. Is that the only arrest that happened on the 2nd?
That's the only one I'm aware of. I did just get an update on the 2nd. There were a crowd estimate of 3,000.
Okay, that's a good number. On the, were any officers injured on the 2nd?
I'll have to get back to you on that. There was some minor, there was one officer hit in the helmet with a full beer. But no serious injuries certainly off that, but
What about protesters?
I don't have information on that right now.
Okay, on the 3rd, yesterday, that was an all-day protest, and can you tell me what that less lethal munition was, or ammunition was that was used?
What, it was either 37 millimeter or 40 millimeter baton round. Basically, it's like, to explain it, like a racquetball. Yeah, and I do have an update too. 5 officers were injured, all minor. No protest is injured in either, or none reported anyway.
You said minor injuries?
Yeah.
Do you have any information if any of the protesters were
Yeah,
injured?
none.
No.
None that we're aware of.
Let's see. Were there any arrests made yesterday?
I'll tell you in a second. There were no arrests yesterday.
Okay. Yeah, that was the day before. Yeah. Okay. So let's see. Now, these projectiles that were thrown at officers, what type of projectile are we talking about?
Often whatever they can pick up off the street, pieces of curb, rocks, bottles, frozen water bottles.
Excuse me, Chief. Please refrain from interrupting the chief when he's trying to respond to the commissioner. Thank you. Chief, go ahead. Ma'am, with the mask, this is your first and last warning.
Yeah, some of
Will be
the,
removed from the room.
some of
Sorry,
the
Chief,
other
go ahead.
objects they're routinely assaulted with full beer cans, fireworks, as I mentioned, pieces of curb or rock that they find out there on the street or on the side of the freeway.
Were any officers injured?
There were five officers were injured, but there were minor injuries overall,
That's a total between the 2 days?
right, as far as I know, right?
And what about protesters? Anybody
No.
injured?
No.
Okay. All right, I think that's all the questions I have. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you,
for
Commissioner.
everyone else.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. We will now go on to agenda item number 2, public comment. Madam Secretary, please announce the first speaker.
The first speaker is Jonathan Foster.
Jonathan Foster, 3 minutes, definitely not enough. Boy, what is a rich girl without a lipstick? And I believe the Eagles are going to win. So, the OIS today on Zepeda, the officer shot 9 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And I think it's a little too much. It's a little too much. And so that leads me to judge, retired judge.
I hear you.
The Graham versus O'Connor 89 Supreme Court decision rests on a reasonable officer. Can you define a reasonable officer for me? You're a judge, you get 90% of your paycheck in retirement. Can you define a reasonable officer? Shot a guy 9 times. I've asked for 1 on this one, maybe 2. How about the net guns? They shot less lethal 3 times. Where were the net guns? I've been requesting this for 6 years. And this also leads me that commissioners should stay here for 10 years. That means you're going from 65 to age 75. You should stay here for 10 years. I don't volunteer because of a long-time Zoomer that volunteered for 30 years. He was told he has to leave, and so I will never help. I didn't read the report on the officer shooting Eric Rivera. I listened to it, so I had to correct myself. I listened to Chief Illuminati Beck talk about it. So, and I watched the video several times. This is why I asked about what is a reasonable officer. And last week it was Rolstead, Chief Rolstead. You shot him, and that he could have been hit with a net gun and saved his life. And have requested 6 years of this. I'm smarter than everybody in the building. I am the smartest, strongest, most powerful man on earth. Okay? My brain runs faster than everybody's brain in the building, okay? Including yours. I will. So you didn't mention the arson, and there was an arson fire on New Year's, right? And you're talking about bringing them PPE. Well, where are the net guns and the shields and the head-to-toe body armor? That's what we need as far as PPE, is shields, net guns, head-to-toe body armor. Trump fired all the FBI. You got to go. And the command staff of the LAPD's got to go, too. Because it won't tell who wrote the George Floyd.
Thank you.
Next, we have Mona M.
You got to go, buddy. You have to pick up and get out of here. You
Thank you. Can you hear me?
got to go.
Hi, yes. What items would you like to speak on?
All items, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Thank you for the time this morning. Fair warning, I'm going to say words I don't normally use. Goat Puppet, Mr. Greenspan, and F-Bomb Guy are all characters that always end up having to talk after that bring shock value to this commission. I beg to say it causes you not to listen, having the words like fair warning, nigger, fuck, cocksucker thrown at you repeatedly causes you not to hear it. This in Scientology is called to become clear, clearing your reactive mind. It is a Scientologist's duty to clear the planet, essentially taking everyone's reactive mind away. The process is that you are repeatedly given things so it flattens your emotions, making you a robot. Now let's insert a child into the mix. This mind control method is used on children as young as 7 to 8 years old. Now here you are listening to 3 minutes. In Scientology, children are exposed and exploited to 3 to 10 hours a day, not being allowed to leave the room, held in captivity with a grown person alone for hours upon hours, made to hold 2 cans as lie detectors, and not allowed to leave until the lie detector says it's okay. The lie detector will not give a green light until the child floats the needle. That means the child has to look up the words or show on dolls what the words mean. It is called word clearing. Please look that up. Would you want your 8-year-old showing what nigger, fuck, or cocksucker is? Mind control on children is abuse per California law. Unlawful detainment or imprisonment is child
Ma'am,
abuse per
you're off
California
topic.
law.
This is not a matter before the police commission. Please stay on topic, or I will terminate your public comment period.
Sir, I am talking about child abuse and looking at the discussion of child abuse. You are receiving videos showing protesters. Some are edited to look hateful and vile, but what is shown is the reason. What is not shown is the reason for protesting. It is the religion. Excuse me, because you did call me and it just kind of upset me. But it is not the religion. It is the abuse happening in the name of the religion. I'm asking for a meeting with the chief of police, the OIG, and the commission, and I haven't heard back. So please be respectful of my request. My email has been sent to the executive. Thank you, and I yield back my time.
The next speaker, please, Hamed Khan.
So there are several items on the agenda today, and particularly this internet crimes against children. I think what's missing from the conversation is the history of crimes that the LAPD has been constantly committing against children as well. And of course, we posted a whole timeline of sexual assault where they were having orgies with cadets. This has all been documented. This is all on our website, stoplapdspying.org. Yes, 16-year-old young women, LAPD cops, having orgies, with these cadets. So, this whole bullshit about internet crimes. But I think the bigger issue is that Judge Teresa over there is asking about certain things. So I have a question for you, Judge, that, behavioral surveillance has become central to LAPD's operation to criminalize people. So I want you to explain to me that what does, and I quote from LAPD's Suspicious Activity Reporting Program, that it's observed behavior reasonably indicative of pre-operational planning of terrorist and or criminal activity. Now, what is that stuff? How does that stand in court? How do you do that? That you're observing somebody that reasonably indicates that somebody is thinking of doing something wrong, and then you open up secret files on them. So this whole issue about constantly talking about immigration and not partnering with the federal agencies in immigration, you are giving these things away to immigration. You are putting in reports through your iWatch program, through your See Something, Say Something program, through your providing alternatives to hinder extremism program, in partnership with the LAUSD through the Los Angeles LASAR program, that you're sending this information to Fusion Center and federal agencies. So, first of all, you are opening up secret files that go to federal agencies based on observed behavior, which is reasonably indicative. Rasha Shields, you're a federal prosecutor as well. And these are the standards that the LAPD is using. And then we are told to circle back and come around that, LAPD is protecting people's individual information. Your license plate readers are directly hooked up, which are providing information. The information sharing environment is vast that goes through various law enforcement information services and through fusion centers and through various other federal agencies. So under what pretext are you even claiming, Garcia, that you are here protecting the undocumented, or just the fuck the undocumented status, either just human beings and people who are living in Los Angeles? When are you going to take action? When are you going to expose that? When are you going to investigate that? When are you going to have that audited? Where's the audit for the suspicious activity reporting program, where you've had constantly these secret files that are being opened, sent to joint terrorism task forces through the fusion centers? What about the joint terrorism task force investigations? So these are all.
Thank you. Thank you. Your 3 minutes is up.
Next, we have defend the LAPD.
Thank you. All items. Can you hear me?
Hi, yes, 3 minutes.
Okay, good morning. Sunday's riot exposed another leadership failure by Chief McDonnell and Mayor Karen Bass. Officers outnumbered and under-resourced were defenseless against rioters throwing bottles and fireworks. This was your first test, Chief McDonnell, a chance to stand with LAPD. Instead, you caved to optics, likely at Bass's command. LAPD knew about this protest, yet sent 20 officers and a sergeant against 3,000. By 1:30 p.m., rioters took the 101 freeway. Neil arrived at 3 p.m., long after officers were surrounded, calling for help that never came. No dispersal order was given, even after officers were attacked. Neil stood by while rioters threw bottles, emboldening them to take over freeways without consequences, and stop downplaying officers' injuries. LAPD finally pulled more officers, but 120 was still nowhere near the 300 needed. You should have mobilized ahead of the planned protest, no matter the cost. LAPD refused mutual aid. 2 SRT teams from the Sheriff's Department arrived at 7 p.m., but were ordered to stand down after an hour. Why? Where the hell were you, Chief, that you couldn't pick up the phone and call Luna? Or was that your request? Commissioners, these are the questions you should be asking. Demand an after-action report. Request mutual aid or increase National Guard support for the Palisades. The fires are devastating, but this is just one part of the city. How will Los Angeles handle a major earthquake, active shooter, or terrorist attack? What about the burglary crews still terrorizing the Valley and West Side? Did those citizens just go without LAPD patrol? And where was the mobilization during the fires? Another failure, Chief. Carranza did far better than Neil. She issued a dispersal order when officers were attacked. Maybe she should have been the next chief. But Angelenos are still outraged. Karen Bass can call them peaceful, but attacking officers is violence. Shut it down. Why were detained individuals released? Where were the buses to haul them off? Why were rioters allowed to do donuts in front of officers? I saw a Toyota Camry circling an intersection, waving flags while officers stood by frustrated they couldn't act. And Karen Bass, I know your people are listening. This cannot be a new normal. Angelenos have had enough. If your budget cuts to LAFD, billions for criminal homeless who steal and set fires daily, and your refusal to let LAPD enforce laws weren't enough, your protection of these so-called peaceful protesters will be your downfall. Chief McDonnell, stand up to Bass. Her days are numbered and so are yours. At least do better while you're here. Your officers are disappointed. Give your commanders what they need to stop this from happening again. And police commissioners, back him up. And if Tom Homan gets this message, come to LA and do the job Bass won't let LAPD do. Excuse my French, but fuck no, Lou Kalanch should slow resources and HQ's Instagram account assist illegals evading federal law enforcement with the Know Your Rights campaign. I think it's time you finally be removed from this commission. You've lost your damn mind. Yield my time.
The next speaker, Matios Cadane.
Before the next speaker takes the podium, sir, in the red hat, the next time you give the finger to the camera, you will be removed. That's your first and last warning, and your friend in front of you as well. Sir, please go ahead.
My name is Matios Guidano with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. And, you know, this is really interesting right now. Like, we have this moment of apparent conflict between callers who are clearly in support of the police, maybe even our police, and this commission, who we would also argue are in support of the police, but are trying to sanitize their violence in one way or another. And it's just really interesting to me how, it was very funny how Chief McDonnell walked in mid-question and interrupted the assistant chief. But, you know, I wish I didn't care about my job that much. But anyway, just to say, you know, Commissioner Shields, you're effectively parroting police talking points right now around the underreporting of crime, right? And the fact that crime numbers are maybe deflated because people aren't calling it in. And let's just say if if people aren't reporting crimes in and these numbers are deflated in one way, which I don't think is true for the record. That's not indicative of people, not reporting crimes or those mechanisms not being in place. That's indicative of people knowing that policing doesn't equal safety. It's true. Like even the department says they can't respond to things. That's not the function of this department. The function of this department is to quash dissent, quash protest. And it's frankly ridiculous that we talk about folks disturbing peaceful protests or police, remaining stern and stoic and strong despite abuse. What's the alternative? And they're looking at me right now. Would you rather they do what they normally do? And that's what you're suggesting, which is shoot people with less than lethals, with guns, hit them with batons. You're frankly in the presence of a room full of people that face the brunt of police violence during peaceful protests all the time. And so what you're saying, I'm pointing out more so for the folks here, is so detached from reality, so detached from the experiences of people and truly just grounded in a fiction. And Commissioner Kalanche, this whole Know Your Rights campaign is incredibly laughable too. Like the police putting out a Know Your Rights, their function is to mask, or to hide, to break people's rights. They lie about it all the time. But I do think you said something really interesting, which is that it would provide another level of legitimacy and credibility for LAPD. That's an interesting point. If we, pull up the counterinsurgency manual for the, U.S. military, it says here, legitimacy determines the transaction cost of political and governmental power. Low legitimacy may breed contempt on the part of the population and may require extensive prodding and incentives by the government to secure compliance of the population. High legitimacy generally invites compliance by the population and therefore requires less effort by the government to ensure compliance. An illegitimate government's only method of controlling its population is coercion, which can be resource intensive. So this is from the counterinsurgency manual. This body is a counterinsurgency body. The coercion in question is physical violence, which we see perpetrated in protests. And on the matter of arrest that you're just taking Jim McDonald's word for, children were arrested.
Thank you.
That's on.
Next, we have Phil M.
Yeah, good morning. Can you hear me?
Hi, yes, what items would you like to speak on?
Yes, please. I would like to have all items.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Yeah, so I know that William Good is there in person, and I specifically want to shout him out because a while back at La Poubelle, we have AirTag Al Labreda, who is supported by Janet Whelan from Scientology, touting Al's disgusting behavior and the way that he was involved with the repeated sexual stalking of a case that's already been settled and very well known. It seems to me that for some reason or another, LAPD just cannot help itself be involved with criminal organizations like Scientology. And you have these repeat offenders who, like Al Labreda, go and stalk women. And then for some reason, you have LAPD also being in bed with people like Janet Whelan, who serves on a CPAB board, and openly touting the behavior of Al Labreda. AirTag Al, that's who LAPD gets in bed with. People like Janet Whelan, and allows them to continually serve on the board of a CPAB, despite the disgusting behavior that Al Labreda, already known very well to the public. AirTag Al. Let's also go back to other abuses that William Good, also in person there, has faced at the hands of LAPD at the behest of Scientology. Detective Aludo literally shoulder-checked Will as he got his face pummeled by a known Scientology agitator way almost a year ago now at La Poubelle. And the agitator, we have the blueprints of La Poubelle. There's only one entrance for ingress and egress. The guy was in there, okay? He broke William's nose, for Christ's sake. And Detective Aludo outright lied and said nobody's in there. He's already fled the scene. And then had the audacity to literally shoulder check William as if to add salt to the wound. The man had his nose bashed and broken. And you have a detective go and shoulder check a victim who's trying to file a victim report and make Aludo do his job by taking a PPA. Aludo needs to be permanently removed from the force. Not shuffled around, which I know you guys do very well, but permanently removed from the force. And Chief, I filed at least 24 complaints dating way back in November and January with literal footage showing many officers, including Aludo, outright refusing to take a PPA. And you dare say on the this position that they're unfounded? Bro, there's literally hours of live stream footage showing your force, not mine, yours, literally harassing, threatening, and outright taking and showing favoritism towards Scientology, a criminal racket where you have one of the people in Scientology serve on a CPAB board and supporting the behavior of AirTag Al. That's you. That's you, Jim McDonald. That's you. And that's this whole commission.
The next speaker, Kuyen Ball.
Yeah, I think the thing I'd want to start with is honestly, Jim, one of your more embarrassing performances. Yeah, you came late, and then literally 12 minutes before you came in, your undersecretary under little Satan, who knows, Daniel literally said there were arrests made, and then 12 minutes later you come in with a statement rife with inaccuracies. Every question you answered was wrong, except for maybe the fact that there are people doing donuts. Honestly, humbling for you. At any rate, this week your verbal presentation is on your quote-unquote gang reduction and youth development program, GRID. On your website for GRID, it talks about the three main contributors to what the website calls risk for gang membership. The first being literally being a youth, the second being living in one of 23 GRID zones, and the third being something called your Youth Services Eligibility Tool. What LAPD calls GRID zones is a process by which certain areas and neighborhoods are deemed quote-unquote gang zones, assigning an automatic designation of criminality to entire blocks and communities, presuming guilt solely based off of geographic location. And in your classic methods of reuse, reduce, recycle, we see your tactics recycled from other geolocation-based police strategies. We've seen this with pred pull hotspots. We've seen this with the Los Angeles Strategic Extraction and Restoration Kill Zones, or LASER. Now, with grid zones, you have once again chosen locations. You've even highlighted them on maps in order to designate who you deem disposable and who you deem worthy of violence. Your predictive policing models are not just bound by geographies, though. A third way you presume guilt is by using what you call your Youth Services Eligibility Tool, YSET. It's laughable you think you provide services, by the way. This tool, YSET, is based off of 9 factors you use to further presume guilt, to demonize young people, and assign criminality to children. The first of that, or one of them, is literally having a critical life event. Thank God you're criminalizing babies because they've had a critical life event. This logic has put children as young as 28 months on your databases and lists just to surveil children. Your efforts to sanitize your violence through the continued counterinsurgency of pretending to form relationships with young people just to further surveil and criminalize them is frankly vile. In fact, you got almost $1 million through a grant to prevent internet crimes against children, as Hamid mentioned. But the reality is that LAPD officers are the one perpetuating sexual violence. As Hamid mentioned, the timeline released in 2017 details some of the countless abuses you've committed. And the patterns and practices are clear. The abuse of children over time is clear and consistent. Your targets are varied, most incidents go unreported, and there's a distinct history of abuse within law enforcement programs. In fact, Errol Souther's own Santa Monica Police Commission fucking police academy, who fucking knows, was a site at which you, LAPD, sexually...
Thank you.
Dr. Jaquel Pitts.
Hello, everybody. I wanted to take the time to express my sympathy for the people who are experiencing the fires and loss of income and business destruction. Also wanted to say hello to Chief McDonald. This is my first time seeing you. Congratulations on becoming the new chief. I wanted to also express my confidence in LAPD of alleviating the issues that are being caused by criminal unrest regarding the protests and etc. And I wanted to take the time to inform you all about an incident regarding police misconduct that my client recently experienced. It occurred on November 10th, 2024, and there was an officer by the name of Officer Helton who unfortunately incarcerated my client despite the fact that he had a CCW license and a BSAS exposed firearms permit. And the officer arrested this particular individual for carrying a firearm despite the fact that my client had the proper credentials. I wanted to notify you all that. Also, I noticed that there has been several instances where individuals have utilized racial slurs during this meeting, and I wanted to notify you all that could be a potential violation of Robert Rules of Order. And as a civil rights activist, it's very offensive to me to hear the N-word utilized in this meeting, and people are not immediately removed. Also, I wanted to inform you all that my client, unfortunately, had a difficulty obtaining a police report in this particular regarding his case. And once he was arrested, the officers confiscated his pepper spray. He was a security guard, so he's licensed to carry weapons, but the pepper spray was not indicated in the police report. So I just wanted to take the time to notify you all of an incident that occurred that consisted of potential police misconduct. And thank you all for your time. God bless you all.
Thank you.
The next speaker.
Excuse me, sir. Excuse me. Doctor, you can speak to one of our staff members back there and they'll take your complaint, please.
The next speaker, Mr. Herman.
Well, I really don't know who you were talking about, Herman, but BHWA Boyle Heights with America attitude is here just to represent the issues on the second claim for relief against the city of Los Angeles and the fucked up police. Violations of the 1st, the 5th, 14th Amendment, and Article Section 2 of the California Constitution regarding enforcement of unconstitutional rules on your fucked up decorum. That answers the gentleman's question earlier before me, dick face. You don't fuck with Batman. You don't fucking question Batman. You fucking listen. You listen for the reason why the city's so fucked up, Earl. The same reason we heard about vandalism, graffiti. What else, Earl? There's a list. The chief of police gave us a fucking list, and I had to come back to verify the fucking list about targeting Donald Trump and fucking ICE. On behalf of Donald Trump and his family, on behalf of America, on behalf of Batman, fuck you. That's my First Amendment, motherfucker. Now you know where we come from. Brown pride motherfucker here. So let's go into the Gadfly song. I want to thank the crown, God, I got from the homies. I say fuck the criminals of law who break the rules all day, every day, all night, like today. What the fuck? I break the rules all like bitches.
Sir,
ain't no
you're off topic.
understanding. No stopping, no stopping. You
topic.
make me proud of.
Your public comment has been terminated. Step away from the podium. Your public comment has been terminated. Step away from the podium. Sir, I'm ordering you out of the room. I'm ordering you out of the room. I'm ordering you out of the room. And by the way, just for clarity here, when you use that word, you're referring to me or all the black people in the room?
I'm referring to the Constitution, motherfucker.
For the others in the room, I apologize for the use of this word.
Disgusting piece of shit that we all are in America, right? Bring down my country. I want DACA, I want ICE, and I demand Trump.
He's got a dog.
Oh. Well, I'm being escorted. Can someone please pick up the camera? Goddamn. Goddamn,
The next speaker, please, William Good.
Now, Commissioner Shields, you asked what happens to officers that commit DUIs. Well, why don't you look at last month's discipline report, where there was an officer who was on duty, drunk driving, had a hit and run, and got arrested. And then when he was off duty, he was drunk driving and got arrested again. And what happened to him? Did he get fired? No, he got a 22-day suspension. 22 days suspension. So rather than ask them what happens, why don't you actually look at the report? Because that wasn't the only officer who committed DUIs who got a suspension last month for 22 days. Now, mentioning, Mr. President, you talked about the guy using the N-word and how it offended all black people in the room. Well, I gotta tell you right now, there is an officer who was caught on their body-worn video referring to me as a black fool. Now, this was after I caught him making an unlawful search. I didn't say a word. I just asked for his name. They refused to give it to me 8 times and sustained a complaint for the unlawful search, right? So I did my service helping out somebody and filed a third-party complaint and got that unlawful search sustained, and those officers were suspended for 2 days. But I had asked 8 times for the cops' names, and they refused to give it to me. I filed a complaint on refusal to give his name or his business card, and you guys said that that's non-disciplinary. Non-disciplinary. So I went to the OIG. I'm sure, Florence, you investigated it. They went and looked at the body-worn video and saw the cop on the body-worn video calling me a black fool. A black fool. And then when the investigators, Chow, at the Hollywood Division complaint supervisor, investigated, and he determined that the cop was just blowing off steam. Blowing off steam. And when the OIG forced the complaint, you guys went and adjudicated it as non-disciplinary. Calling me a black fool is non-disciplinary. Now let me ask you something. If an officer was caught on tape calling somebody a Jewish fool, what would be the reaction? There would be unrest. There would be meetings. People would be fired. But Errol, when you were so offended by this guy saying the N-word, are you offended by them calling me, these officers calling me a black fool? I have emailed Chief about this 9 times, asking, is this acceptable? And under him, will this be considered non-disciplinary? He has not responded. You were all on those emails. So you will all be held accountable, Shields. You guys work in the private sector. I'm going to ask for everyone to send me all of your clients, and I'm going to reach out to them to ask if that's
Thank you. Thank you.
The next speaker, Audit LA.
Good morning. I do want to say something on that case. With the present member Nuri and all that, with the leaked tapes, even if it's on tape and it's not being heard in public, the people of LA have said numerous times, we don't want this behavior. We don't want it. So I ask that you please do what's right for Mr. Good. I'm here too to talk about the CPRA issues. I have to do CPRAs because I am going up against a cult, a child abusing cult who's abusing the city laws and everything else. But they like to twist things around, and I'm finding a lot of interesting things. Well, first of all, I know I'm not getting all the CPRAs because I'm not getting the conversations that lead up to some of the stuff or the follow-up. And so I'm going to ask the chief to please, and I'm getting all these weird things like, oh, it has to be, like they don't want to release the CPRAs. But I even saw one letter where they're trying to say that, oh, the lady in the wheelchair is going to be here to see if, testing the permit because they can't prevent vehicles. I mean, they can only prevent vehicles, not sidewalk. But I never have been disruptive, never done anything. If I protest, it's more like I'm trying to see that they're abiding by the laws, because they are not. They are breaking so many laws, the Church of the Cult of Scientology. But they're actually trying to convince you that I'm going to be there and I'm going to scare children. Like the lady in the wheelchair is going to be here on Easter Sunday and it's going to terrorize the children. Please don't let her come. And, you know, and it's just ridiculous. And they're trying to make out, they're constantly saying, we're criminals. You know what, we're peaceful. All the protesters, the only violence has been against the protesters, like Mr. Good getting his nose broken and other violence. There's been arrest, but no prosecution, except for the one where, you know, where the officer said there was no crime, but somehow they got the city attorney to, press charges for him cleaning up something that was not allowed on the easement, cleaning up the trash, in other words. So they have so much influence with your ears. They keep saying that we are breaking codes 647, I think C, and 56.1, okay, which is blocking easement, blocking people, blocking right of way. They're the ones blocking the right of way with their illegal ADA non-compliant planters and, rose bushes on the easements, hosing people, like they hosed. You're saying, like about protest, peaceful protesting. They were feeding the unhoused, making it, yes, protesting the crimes of Scientology, because there's a lot of crimes going on that no one's looking into. I have victims lined up, they're lined up on your radio, to call in to tell you that they have been crimes, and here in this department, in this, at these blue buildings, victims of crimes. But no, it falls on deaf ears. So I'm asking you to please, don't listen, get them off your CPAPs. They have too much influence. Thank you.
The next speaker, Andrew Gravener.
Starting off with the Chiefs report. It's a nice team effort today since McDonald walked in late. The Chiefs report should be limited to a maximum of 3 minutes at every meeting. If the Chiefs report exceeds 3 minutes, we should be able to match the amount of time the Chief takes, and everyone should be able to speak both in person or on the phone. You meet like once a week for a few hours. I think you can handle hearing from the couple people who are here. It's not even like there's that many people because you held this meeting at 9:30 on a Tuesday. You remember when you had those in-person or those community meetings, and of course you canceled them because it was a disaster. The one I went to in the Valley, you're just targeting people left and right at that meeting. So lots of consistencies in the report about what happened with all the protests and everything. And of course, it's no surprise that the LAPD is antagonizing people, antagonizing people who are protesting Trump, since most of the LAPD is lots of Trumpers, lots of, far-right sympathies and ideologies going on with your officers. So it's not really that much of a surprise that you're all, attacking people who dare to protest your favorite leader. But, it is interesting that you don't know how many citizens were injured at the protests. You seem to be aware of the officers, but you can't answer how many citizens were injured during these, protests. And, the LAPD's response was not, as far as I know, from everything I know, they were firing less lethals. They were not calm and just, letting people protest. They're standing there, firing less lethals, trapping people in tunnels, all this kinds of crap. So, yeah. And I do find it interesting that, how unserious this chief is with public with the troops report. He just sits there smirking and seems to be almost bursting into laughter as people talk about how they're getting their rights violated, getting their loved ones are getting shot and killed by the LAPD, and he's just sitting there smirking and laughing and all this stuff. We have some consent agenda items, not a lot of time for that today, but we do have, let's see, crimes against children. The LAPD constantly is we're constantly hearing about the LAPD sexually assaulting and harassing children. And yeah.
Megan Wiles.
Today you will rule whether the shooting of Jose Robles was in policy or out of policy. And I just want to state for the record that these terms mean absolutely nothing. Because even if you find it out of policy, and even if the person died, the officer, as has been pointed out by other speakers, your officers face very few consequences ever. And we actually know that. I've talked about it before. Django published this really handy report called Discipline Resulting from Out of Policy Officer Involved Shootings, 2015 to 2020. And in those 5 years, there was 54 people shot by 66 officers that you found to be out of policy, and your standards are very low. How many of those 66 officers were fired? 1. 20 people dead, 1 officer fired. Because, spoiler alert, the entire system of how they're held accountable is rigged as fuck. So you're out of policy, in policy doesn't mean anything. Do you know what else doesn't mean anything? Is your critical incident videos. They're literal works of fiction. They're poorly made short films. They're not even trying that hard. You can debunk the narrative of the critical incident video for Jose Robles literally using the footage of the critical incident video. Captain Kelly Muniz, who is really allergic to vocal inflection for some reason, starts lying right at the beginning of the video. She says they received a report that somebody was pointing a handgun at an unidentified victim. Sounds real scary, doesn't it? Sounds bad. Then she plays the 911 call, and a pretty calm person is saying they saw somebody brandishing a pistol to the public, kind of pointing it in the direction of vehicles. That's a lot less escalated. That's a very different situation than somebody specifically intimidating a person with a gun. The rest of your short film is even worse. It includes a freeze frame of Jose Robles with a gun pointed towards the officer. But to get that shot, they had to catch him mid-swing because, again, he was just kind of wildly waving the gun around. You can see it in the video for yourself, which is why when his case was actually put in front of a judge, they had to dismiss the charges of threatening a peace officer because your own fucking video shows that he didn't. Sad. When Jose Robles was shot by Officer Jose Magallanes Gomez, his BB gun had already fallen to the ground and he was walking in the other direction. When Jose Robles was shot by Officer Jose Magallanes Gomez, Officer Gomez's partner had already put her weapon down. But Officer Jose Magallanes Gomez couldn't resist getting a shot off. And why wouldn't he? He will face no real consequences for it.
Jamie Cusick.
I'd like to address Agenda Item 3B, the donation of $45,000 for the Symposium for LA Women Police Officers. I think it really speaks to the insidiousness of reform in general, because women were introduced to LAPD as a reform. It was thought in the 1910s that the influence of women would counteract the masculine, militarized nature of policing because women were inherently less brutal than men, and should therefore handle the arrests of other women, which were almost exclusively sex workers or female so-called sex delinquents, and to handle juvenile cases of both girls and boys. And obviously, just because these children were being arrested by women, it did not make those arrests more humane. It just normalized the idea of arresting children. And in fact, women police officers were instrumental in creating juvenile courts and prisons in LA. It is not normal for armed officers to apprehend anyone of any age and remove them from their communities for any alleged reason for any amount of time. Not only does it not fucking matter what the agenda of the officer is who's perpetuating that harm, it's ridiculous that women officers were used to make the entire institution of policing seem more palatable, when, at least until the 1970s, they comprised only 1% of the entire force. And none of this shit is a relic of the early 20th century. Last year, during the People's Encampment in support of a free Palestine, we all saw LAPD very deliberately place women officers and young officers of color in the front line closest to us, while all the older white men huddled away at the back and gave them orders. The strategy there was so fucking obvious. Since LAPD had put these pigs in full riot gear to try to intimidate people holding pillows and water bottles, they wanted to control the optics of the situation and use their few women officers to try to justify not only their unhinged militarized response to that particular protest, but their existence as a whole. And the irony is that you've never been able to prevent your own officers from harassing, stalking, doxing, and routinely raping their female colleagues. You can't control that shit any more now than you could 100 years ago. And that's because you don't want to. You don't want to control it. One of the main reasons LAPD is effective as a colonizing force is that it relies in huge part on sexual violence to terrorize LA's black, brown, and unhoused communities. That's one of the tricks you fuckers have learned from your time training in Israel with the IOF, which, as we all know, uses rape of both women and men as an officially legal, state-sanctioned form of retribution and torture. Any woman who joins this force is not only implicated in helping to make this inherently sexist institution seem, to Mathias's comment, legitimate, they're contributing directly.
Thank you. Thank you. Your public comment has ended. Step away from the podium. Step away from the podium.
The next speaker is Jason Reedy.
Okay, so last week this commission approved over $100K in donations from the LA Police Foundation, and today you will approve $45,000 for the lady pigs of this department to attend a symposium put on by the Los Angeles Women's Police Officers Association. So speaking of the women of the LAPD, no mention by commissioners or Chief Chalky about Captain Sylvia Sanchez, who revealed in a claim made against the city that she faced retaliation from command staff because she looked into two Hollenbeck pigs that grabbed a 16-year-old by the neck and slammed her against the concrete barrier in 2022. Now, Sanchez categorized this interaction as an illegal detention followed by an unauthorized use of force after reviewing their body cam. The two girls that your LAPD pigs descended on said they did nothing wrong and were looking for a lost pendant that had fallen off a broken gold chain. These violent pigs, in their report of lies, claimed that they had arrested a 16-year-old for a suspicion of domestic violence and detained her without force. Of course, no mention of the homophobic slur they directed towards the girls or why they later released them. The 16-year-old was so shook up from being violently assaulted by these pigs that she had a panic attack. Now, going back to that $45K from the Police Foundation, it was acquired via Newton Division. And man, what's Newton Division been in the news as of late? Oh, I know, pig Carlso Cornell, a sergeant at Newton who had the nerve to clock in at work hours after driving drunk and killing a pedestrian. Now, the pinkest of pigs right here, Jimmy, said this. Let me be clear. The allegations alleged in this case are absolutely unacceptable. Sergeant Cornell's alleged involvement in a felony hit and run is not only disturbing, but it betrays the trust of the public and oath that we take as law enforcement officers. There is no tolerance for criminal behavior within this department. But Jim, why you always lying? William Good made sure we remembered another pig out of Newton, Sergeant Gabriel Gaxiola, who while on duty got arrested for a DUI in an LAPD vehicle in 2016. In 2022, he was arrested for another DUI that resulted in an accident. And where did LAPD have Gaxiola posted up recently? Well, he was racking up OT outside, making sure that Palisades was quote-unquote secure, right? So it seems like you do have a tolerance for drunks. And might I add, racist, sexist, rapists, and the list goes on. Oh, and what about another pig by the name of Detective Tommy Thompson? The same pig that William was referring to earlier that got the 22-day suspension. Again, he got a DUI twice in 3 days. The first DUI happened in an LAPD vehicle, and while he was on duty and during the same DUI, he was involved in a hit and run. But that wasn't even the first time that Tommy put the community in danger. And let's remember this, crimes against children. Tommy, while stationed at Newton, shot up a car with a bunch of teenagers in it, ultimately killing two 16-year-olds, Salvador Cibrian and Uriel Damian, who at the time were juniors at Manual Arts High School. The driver of the car, Miguel Lopez, a 19-year-old, and an active duty Marine corporal, one that you would have targeted through Skillshare, was shot in the eye and crashed into a tree as a result. Shortly after this, Jim's mentor, notorious racist Bill Bratton, told people protesting the LAPD over the deaths of these youth to control your kids. Thompson has been a part of 2 shootings before that, including one where he shot at a moving vehicle, but this info isn't readily available.
Thank you.
Because the LAPD refuses to maintain a database of their
Thank you. Your public comment period has expired. Step away from the podium.
and got 2 DUIs in 3 days.
You are disrupting the meeting. Step away from the podium.
So you are telling me. Stop fucking lying.
The next speaker, Wayne Spindler.
So we would like to thank you very much for staging your public comment to conflict with the city council meeting so that we could be deprived of speaking at both meetings. Thank you.
Do you think that's intentional?
Oh no, it's just a mere coincidence. So we looked last night at the protests. Your officers looked very sad last night, Jim. They were carrying these large black sticks with these helmets. They were wearing helmets. What were they going to do? Hammer on humans with those sticks like a construction project? How come they pushed a woman down and took her Mexican flag out of her hands, Jim? Isn't that assault by a police officer under color of authority? How fucking stupid do you have to be? You don't know how to do your jobs. And then look at this multicultural panel here. Doesn't have a single white person aboard, not a single person. 2 Latinas that are totally fucking useless. We got a Latino here, totally useless. And then we have Russia. Well, we know she identifies herself as non-white Middle Eastern. And then, of course, Stephen from the hit movie Django Unchained, the president there, Stephen. Let's give Stephen a hand.
Oh, good.
So you have to understand that Django was the good guy. Stephen was the slaver, played impeccably by the masterful
You're off
artist.
topic. Get back on topic or your public comment will be terminated.
I'm trying. Jim, do you see what he's doing, Jim? You see how illegal his conduct is, Jim? When will you, as a police officer, have him placed under arrest and investigated for depriving people under the Tom Bain Act of California? When will you do the right thing, Jim? And Mr. Spindler's swatting incident, March 30, 2017, when will the missing tapes be given to Mr. Spindler so he can give it to his new lawyer? When will the witness that worked for the city of Los Angeles, who hid his ID and didn't give his information, when will you turn that information over to Mr. Spindler? He was the key witness that knew he wasn't armed, and it was a complete lie. He was swatted illegally. When will you do that, Jim? The city attorney here, we email him, he won't do it. But you can do it, Jim. And then Mr. Spindler can get his information and reopen his civil rights case and get the proper compensation he needs so he can get the fuck out of here, Jim, and retire. In fact, let's both retire later to Tennessee. Then we don't have to pay state income tax. When will you stop the cover-up? I know your little bellies are hurting. I know you want to help this poor man here. Help him because, you know, he's tired sometimes of coming here and speaking with a puppet out of his...
Thank you.
Adam S.
Good morning. I often look at the LAPD arrest data posted online and can't help but notice that it seems there has been no uploading of release from custody arrest data in about 6 weeks. Wondering why that is. Seems like shortly after McDonnell was elected by the mayor, these RFC arrests stopped being reported. Restraint was brought up today by the commissioners, speaking to the response to protest. I was reading the department's report on the murder of Jason McConney in Skid Row last night.
Excuse me, sir. I'm sorry.
No, I'm good. I'll just keep talking.
Sir.
Who was murdered a year ago yesterday. Some of the lowlights from this report include, and I quote, Officer Garcia stated when he observed McConney armed with a knife, He believed McConney was going to kill his fellow officers. As a result, he unholstered and fired one round at McConney. Garcia continued, and I quote, "I see him. He has a knife in his hand above his head, sharp object. It looked like, I would say, color white, and he was holding it like if he was going to kill someone." Another quote, McConney turned towards officers. Officer Orozco assessed McConney took on a fighting stance. I read all these lies and bullshit from this report because as commissioners celebrate the so-called restraint of officers at recent protests, we know that too often these officers, particularly in places like Skid Row, are actually hunting people. We know that despite all of the procedural reforms around use of force celebrated by elected officials, this commission, and the department itself, they really just serve to provide cover for the practice of hunting in our communities, providing cover for the stalking and murder of people like Jason McConney. I remember in maybe 2017 or 18, when one of these use of force reforms was moving through the California legislature, is when I first heard the term objective reasonableness. I guess this was introduced in a lawsuit called Graham versus O'Connor, but the objectively reasonable standard establishes the necessity for the use of force to be based on the individual officer's evaluation of the situation considering the totality of circumstances. Going back to the report about the murder of Jason McConney, it says, prior to the officer-involved shooting, 3 officers observed McConney with an object in his hand, but had a different assessment of what the object was. Officer Chomuk believed it was a screwdriver. Officer Quintero described it as a sharp object, and Officer Garcia stated it was a knife. Sergeant Punzalan also observed an object in McConney's hand, described it as a sharp, pointy knife. As we all know, this was a white plastic fork. We also know that your role here on the commission is not to stop this type of violence, but to make excuses for it, make it more acceptable, legitimize it. And I wonder when you go to bed at night and kiss your kids goodnight, except you, Errol, I hope, when you go about your days, how do you think about objective?
Thank you.
And that is the last speaker, sir.
Thank you. We will now move on to agenda item number 3. Consent agenda items. We have items 3A through C. Are there any questions or comments on today's agenda items? No? Okay, hearing none. I move that we adopt the recommendation for board action for consent agenda items 3A through C. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you very much. We will now move on to agenda item number 4, regular agenda items. 4A is a verbal presentation relative to the Gang Reduction and Youth Development Program. Commander Espinosa, good morning.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
And if you would, when you settle in, just introduce everyone here on the panel. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, thank you, everybody. Good morning, Inspector General, you, Chief McDonnell, Executive Director Sibley, Commission President, Vice President, and Commissioners Garcia, Calanche, Sanchez Gordon, and our City Attorney, Carlos de la Guerra. Thank you in advance for having us here this morning. I would like to introduce members of the Mayor's Office, Office of Public Safety, Office of Community Safety, to provide a presentation on gang reduction and youth development. Here with us today is Deputy Mayor Karen Lane, who leads the GRID office, Melvin Hayward, her Senior Director, Charvon Turner, her Deputy Director, Danny Zamora, who is the Deputy Director. He sits right behind me, and he will soon be taking this seat. And Sergeant 2 David Childress, who is the GRID liaison for the department. They will be speaking to you guys today about the collaborative efforts as a public safety initiative involving the LAPD as it relates to intervention, prevention, and reentry, the support that we provide, and the collaborative work that we do together to further public safety in the city. I will go ahead and Sergeant Childress and I will sit back here, let GRID take the table, and if there are any questions following the presentation of us specifically, we will come up and answer them. Otherwise, this will be a GRID presentation on their effort.
Okay, thank you, Commander.
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation to morning, Chief, and to the commissioners as well. I am the Deputy Mayor of Community Safety with the Mayor's Office. So just to give some context of our work, Mayor Karen Bass established the Office of Community Safety to support community-led efforts to prevent and intervene around community harm and crime. And so our philosophy is that once police are called, once LA fire is called, once emergency management is called, once the tent goes up or the yellow tape is there, we've already lost. A community has been impacted, a family member has been lost. And so our work is really to prevent crime from happening in the first place, one. And then two, when community harm happens, how do we invest in communities not only to support victims and survivors of crime, but how do we actually acknowledge that that block, that neighborhood, that school has also experienced harm? And so we do the work to actually invest in neighborhoods and communities as well. Additionally, so our office houses work to build the infrastructure to support nonprofit organizations and community residents in doing that work. So that infrastructure looks like providing not only public resources to support community-led efforts, but we also do some significant work on how do we actually strengthen nonprofits through capacity building and technical assistance. We know that nonprofit organizations actually make up the social safety net for many communities. And so when a resident in a community is in need, they'll go to their faith-based organization or their community-based organization first for support. The programs that we support in our office includes community violence intervention, which is the Gang Reduction Youth Development Program, which we'll talk a lot about today. But it also includes the mayor's initiatives around civilian crisis response. So the CIRCLE program sits within our office, as well as strategic initiatives around juvenile and adult reentry. So moving on to the Gang Reduction Youth Development Program, just for clarification, GRID came into formation after a long community engagement process in the early 2000s. So community-based organizations and residents, but more importantly, the subject matter experts, residents that were doing community violence intervention for decades, actually informed the model and continue to be the backbone of the GRID program. These are individuals that not only have lived experience, but also deep relationships in the neighborhoods that they serve. And they leverage those relationships and experiences not only to stop bullets and stop violence, but they also do the work to actually transform individuals and provide support for families. That work is often not quantified. Because oftentimes we rely on crime statistics, and it's difficult to count what didn't happen. So again, the mayor's office administers this program, and what I want to bring up, I don't think the city of Los Angeles often gets credit for the fact that for over 2 decades, we've actually integrated crime prevention and community violence intervention into our public safety system. It's not a program that sits besides, it's not just a charitable effort. We as a city have really incorporated a community violence intervention as a strategy to make our community safer. In other words, we have actually adopted alternatives to arrest and incarceration as public safety strategies. As a result, violent crime has reduced dramatically in the city, and GRID has become not only a national model, but an international model for community violence intervention. We're jumping around just a bit, but we can hold it here. I want to demonstrate, I think the one way to demonstrate GRID's impact in 2024, in our what we call grid zones, and for clarification, grid zones are one thing that makes us the most effective is that we are a data-driven program, and it's data that is gathered through community participatory research. It is community members themselves are looking at the data, analyzing the data, and informing the data that we collect. And so grid zones are not intended to criminalize communities, but instead it recognizes that there are communities in Los Angeles that are the most impacted by community violence, often the most underserved, and often the most hit by poverty and crime. And so because of that, we use an equity frame to invest in those communities to disrupt the economic and social conditions that precipitate violence and crime. So that is how grid zones are defined. It's a way that we look at how do we invest city resources to disrupt those drivers of crime. We've done that successfully as a city for over 2 decades. In 2024, in the 23 grid zones that are listed before you, there was a 44.8% reduction in homicides in those grid zones. In addition, there was 47.8% reduction in victims shot just in the grid zones. And citywide, outside of the grid zones, this is now the 2nd year in a row, the city has experienced a 26% reduction in gang-related homicides citywide. So we know that the model is working. We are actually making neighborhoods safer. I'm gonna turn it over to our senior grid director, who brings to this work not only the experience of being a nonprofit leader, but started as an interventionist himself, help inform the grid model, has been a technical assistance provider nationally and internationally around community violence intervention. So I'll pass it to Melvin to talk more about the components of the program.
Good morning. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just to give you all a little history around the grid model and how we started to incorporate the strategy on the ground. It started around 2008. And there was an assessment done to figure out the kind of comprehensive services that were needed across the city. And we ended up landing with this comprehensive intervention and prevention model. Some of the critical elements of our work involve community engagement, where we're hosting pop-up events in the community, where we're engaging young people on school campuses. Yes, sir. Oh. I thought, oh, yeah. It sounded good to me. But the community engagement is a critical element of our work because, one, we start to learn and understand the pulse of the community, but also in areas of how we can support in our current grid zones. So we're interfacing with LAUSD campuses across the city. We're interfacing in communities where there have been incidents, where there were hot spots, and we have grid agencies who are providing pop-ups to meet community, work with families, but also talk to young people who may have been affected by incidents that happened in their community. But also, I think a critical element is the gang prevention work. Our goal is to cut off the pipeline for young people even wanting to join gangs, but also engage in pro-social activities on campus, in the community, but also have nonprofit organizations that are indigenous to those communities to support those young people and their families, with the ultimate goal of stabilizing a young person, but also their home, but also having those families also engage in other activities that support peace and support young people in each one of those grid zones. And then finally, our intervention work. We have a host of case managers who are providing one-on-one and group service support for young people from the ages of 14 to 25, with the ultimate goal of helping them to recondition themselves to be as successful as they possibly can, with the ultimate goal of having young people no longer engage in counterproductive activity. But one of the key elements of that work is incident response, where you have intervention workers who are showing up to incidents where there are shootings and or homicides or fights that are happening across the city, with the ultimate goal of reducing the potential for retaliatory incidents, but also engaging with groups and individuals from those groups to understand what non-aggression agreements look like, talking about conflict mediation and resolution, but also helping individuals that have been victimized receive the necessary support for them to continue to work through those types of situations. And so, you know, this work is extremely important. Like the deputy mayor said, I was a intervention worker, started on the ground, moved my way up to becoming an executive director of an organization, and just happy and honored to be able to sit in this position to support the city of Los Angeles.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Siobhan Turner. And so as we talk about the components of the grid, I wanted to hit on our prevention services. As Melvin indicated, our prevention services are a key component. Can you hear me? Okay. Sorry. Vertically challenged here, are a very key component to shifting the narrative of violence in our communities. I started with an old adage, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? And so what we know for sure is there is no definitive cure, but we work every day, our prevention agencies work every day to work on what that ounce of cure, that pound of cure will look like. Talking about eligibility, our prevention age is between 10 and 15, but what we also know is that ecosystem is changing, right? So the demographic of who is doing violence is getting younger, right? And so we are enhancing what that looks like for ourselves as well. So as we are changing, we're 10 to 15, but we want to enhance what that looks like for our prevention agencies. So we are putting in place so that we can start to treat younger, right? For those who are predisposed to crime and or violence and or gang violence, we want to make sure that we get them earlier so that we are able to help minimize and change the narrative for them. Although the eligibility is living in the grid zones, presence in the grid zones, and or attending school in those grid zones, we want to make sure that we are focusing on those youth who are in those grid zones and making an impact. We have 9 risk factors that are used. I won't go through all of them. However, there is family, gang influence, substance abuse. So all of the things that could predispose a youth to violence, we want to make sure that we tackle those things. The prevention component is primary and secondary. So we have primary participants we have primary participants who exhibit 2 to 3 risk factors, and then we have secondary who are 4 or more risk factors, okay? And so those secondary, they go through phases. Secondary goes through phases. There's 7 phases. It's a 6-month period. They have the ability to go through that once, and then again a second time if that has not helped them. And so we can also do it a 3rd time, but we have to then make sure, as we understand, it is individualized. So we have to make sure that whatever we are doing, if it didn't work the first time, we got to go back to it the second time and figure out what those barriers are to make sure that they are helping them around. If for any reason that prevention doesn't help, that's when our intervention steps in as well. Intervention starts from 14 to 25. I'll let Danny handle that part. But prevention, if we cannot get them shifted and change that narrative in prevention, we will move them to intervention as well. And I will hand that over to Danny to talk about interventions.
So just because I know we're running out of time, I just wanted to bring your attention to some of our success of our service model. And so if we could go through the presentation. So just so you get a sense of how many people are served throughout the city for intervention, we serve about a total of 3,458 young people and their families. So it's not just the young person, but there are wraparound services for their entire family. We work with about 32 agencies that provide both prevention and intervention services. I'm going to speed us through just so that we can have questions. The grid intervention services, as Melvin mentioned, is that comprehensive approach. We serve about 3,196, young and emerging adults plus their families. And so part of that work is not just case management, but how do we actually do warm handoffs to other nonprofits within the ecosystem to support those families as well. if we keep going to the violence interruption. So as Melvin mentioned, the other key part of the component is when there's incidents of violence that occur, how do we not only support survivors and victims, but how do we prevent retaliatory violence from happening? And that's been a key part of the work. So what we call that is the proactive peacekeeping activities. So in just the last year, there's across all of those agencies close to 50,000 activities. So again, what we're talking about is pouring into communities that are impacted by violence. We've also responded, our grid agencies have responded to over 600 incidents of violence. So that could look like a homicide or shooting, but it could also look like a fight, right? So how do we make sure that a fight doesn't turn into a homicide? And so by showing up, again, trusted messengers in the community to actually de-escalate community tensions has been very successful. Moving on. So the other piece of a big, huge component of the work is community engagement. So again, how do we actually not only serve the family through case management, but we also want to impact the neighborhood. And so again, we understand that violence doesn't just impact that family, but it has a rippling effect across neighborhoods. And so grid agencies work using the specific needs of that community, but also the assets in that community, right? What cultural, we build resiliency by honoring our culture, legacies of our neighborhoods. And so grid agencies are agencies that have deep roots in the neighborhoods that they serve. And so they use those connections to create events, opportunities for people to come together. We know when people feel connected, there's less incidents of violence in a community. So how do we create social connectedness in our neighborhoods? So these are education campaigns, they're pop-up activities, really leveraging the culture, unique culture and history of each neighborhood. One of our largest community engagement activities is Summer Night Lights. And so Summer Night Lights actually preceded the Grid Comprehensive Model. It started as an experiment in 2008 in Baldwin Hills Village, where there was a huge uptick in crime and youth violence in particular. And so community organizations came together, partnered with Los Angeles Police Department. We know that violence upticks late at night. And in the summer, that's when we have surges of community violence. And it's typically young people who don't have productive things to do in the evening. And so the Summer Night Lights model was designed in that moment. It was called Summer of Success. Provide recreation, family, and pro-social activities at the time when we can anticipate youth violence. And so that was between 9 and 11 o'clock at night. So the city actually adopted that model. We continue to do that now across 44 sites, including 3 housing developments, where we partner once again with nonprofit organizations, the Recreation and Park Department, as well as LAPD. Because what we found is that community members and even intervention agencies talk about the significance of having LAPD doing a community policing model in the summer. So what we try to do, staffing is always a challenge, but when LAPD officers actually are walking through the park, engaging with families, it contributes to perceptions and feelings of safety, but it's part of the model. It helps work. So we have intervention workers and ambassadors who are providing safety at the perimeters, LAPD officers who are doing community policing at that time, and nonprofit organizations along with RAP, Recreation and Park, providing recreation activities. And so what we have found citywide, we're able to see that in most of our grid zones, violence is either reduced, which is the goal, or it's stabilized. So we're not experiencing the peak that we typically see across the city where we don't have Summer Night Lights. And so those are the main components. We'll pause. These are the subject matter experts to take your questions. And again, Danny's also comes from the work around intervention, hospital-based intervention. So we would love to take your questions, but we wanted to give you an overview of the model.
Deputy Mayor Lane, thank you very, very much, you and Commander Espinoza, for the incredible work that you're doing. I'm sure that all my fellow commissioners have several questions, so I'm going to limit myself and be as brief as I can. You opened with Circle and other programs that are alternatives to police response. Thank you for mentioning that. The commission regularly requests those services that can give us data with regards to patrol officer hours saved. And so if there's any way that we can amplify those numbers and that work for you, we certainly will. I appreciate you mentioning how difficult it is to quantify prevention, which is actually impossible, but the fact that you have that kind of data point for police hours, I should say police officer hours saved, that helps a lot. Just two quick questions. The first is on the grid zones, and I appreciate your comment about not being labeled grid in a way to criminalize an area. It is data-driven, but I would just ask you, would you ever reach a point where that zone is doing so well that it almost becomes self-sustaining, that it might be labeled something else or reach another level?
So I'll start, but please chime in. So the data points that come into play as we define a grid zone is several. So there's one, the level of violence, but there's also just other social economic indicators. So poverty, the number of individuals that might be on probation or parole, the number of young people involved in the child welfare system. And so while violence is an indicator and we want to maintain low levels of violence, we understand that there's other socioeconomic conditions that we're also trying to address. And so the violence would not be the indicator where we would say we're gonna remove grid zone services or grid services. Again, I think grid zone defines our service area, right? And so we want to continue providing services even when we're having success with crime reduction.
Thank you. And I want to congratulate you on your success, having been an interventionist and now a director. And I've worked with several of your colleagues over the years, and particularly around Southwest, Dr. Bashir and Skip Townsend and others. So my point is, I would imagine there are lots of young people in the community like you who want to be interventionists. Is there a program model, if you will, pipeline to have those folks follow in your footsteps and do what you've done?
For
to train?
sure. And I thank you for that question. So we've developed a strategy internally in the GRID office called the Community Ambassador Program. And so the goal for that process is for young people or people who have influence in any given community to, one, have an opportunity to become an entry-level worker, right? They're not a full-time interventionist, but they also have the license to operate, which is something that we called and coined many years ago, which is essentially a relationship in the community where people trust these individuals. And so currently we have about 25 ambassadors citywide who ultimately have the opportunity to become full-time interventionists. But this is kind of the prerequisite to becoming an interventionist. But also the agencies that we're working with also have the opportunity to assess their impact, what's their readiness level like, but also provide some additional training and support for those folks. And so my goal is to increase that pipeline. I have always stated that we need to get younger and more relevant with the people that we're serving. And so this is an opportunity for us to do that.
Thank you. I was waiting for you to mention license to operate, which is a phrase I've heard so many times.
Yes, sir.
Last question that I have is obviously the relationship with Los Angeles Police Department. It speaks for itself, but what's your collaboration like with LA School Police in this program?
I think it's really at this point based on the relationships that the organizations have with those campuses. I'm happy to say that we've just signed an MOU with LAUSD that wasn't around for many years. And so we engage with LAUSD on a weekly basis. And so interventionists are doing safe passages around campuses, but also if there's a need to engage with the LAUSD PD, there are conversations around strategy. What are the hot spots? What are the incidents that are taking place in and around those campuses so we can provide support? It hasn't been elevated at the rate that we work with LAPD, but the goal is for us to continue to move that relationship forward.
Great, thank you so much. Vice President Shields.
Thank you. Thank you for the wonderful presentation and for all the great work that you all are doing. And really, Deputy Mayor, I want to thank you for your vision and leadership in terms of approaching public safety in a more holistic way. And so I really appreciate that. And I think you have a commission that is very in favor of finding alternatives. Again, the whole point is how do we achieve public safety? And the police aren't always the number one most effective tool for that. And so thank you for stepping in with some alternative tools. And I appreciate, I think the commission also is very in favor of like the model of community policing. And so having officers engaged with the community and at community events, including some of the events that you all provide. But I also appreciate that you have an independent relationship with the community that's separate and apart from police, and want to make sure that we kind of respect those boundaries that you have, because you are trusted members and messengers with the community. How can we better support you in your mission and also have the LAPD involved in some way to build those bridge with the community?
Well, thank you for saying that. It's important that intervention workers in the community maintain their integrity, but also a bit of separatism from being looked at as a friend to law enforcement. There is a professional understanding that we train to in our academies that breaks down the importance of coordination with law enforcement. But if intervention workers are looked or deemed to be too close to law enforcement, it could impact their credibility. And so it's a healthy balance that we have to continue to monitor. And that's why we train all of our community intervention workers to be certified in the work and understand how to work that balance, but also maintain credibility with PD, but also the community and the folks that they're working with. And so thank you for asking that question. It's a balancing act.
I think the other places where we've talked to the chief and leadership of the department, on the intervention side, the notification of when an incident happens is really critical. And so we're working with the chief and leadership to figure out how we can improve that notification time. And the difference, and it might seem minor, and it also plays into what Melvin said. I mean, we don't want to share or hear more information than necessary to actually prevent retaliatory violence, right? And so the department does need time to sort things out when there's an incident, so we don't expect notification in the moment. The department has to do its investigation work. That's the role of the police department. But when too much time lingers, rumors start to flurry, right? And so part of the work, and it sounds very simple, but it's actually very impactful, is how the interventions role is one, to get in front of any rumors, to try to de-escalate any kind of tension, to support family members. That's the work of intervention. Investigation is police. And so we try to keep that boundary there, but the notification sometimes can take longer, and then the work is harder to do. The other is, I think this is a joint partnership with the mayor's office and the city council, along with the department. Community policing requires the availability of staff, and so we continue as a city to continue to work on recruitment and retention of law enforcement. SNL works better when it's the same officers that come every night, and so because of staffing, it makes that more difficult. And so I think but that's a challenge that we have to tackle as a city, along with the department and city councils, to try to address that. So I think those are the biggest ways that the commission can support this continued work.
Wonderful, thank you. And if there's ever an opportunity for us to attend a community pop-up or any other events, please let us know. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Kalanche.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I'm very familiar with GRID. I worked closely with GRID since its inception. I know Danny and I grew up in the same neighborhood and actually worked under the GRID program in the same neighborhood, so I've seen it evolve. I think the biggest leap forward from like when it started to now is like how closely law enforcement works with the interventionists. There was a time, we all know, there was a time where there wasn't that collaboration out when, especially when there was incidents. So I feel that that's been a huge growth. So I just applaud your work. I would love to hear from Dan. No, just kidding. I actually, the only question I have is if there's anything, this is the time to bring it up. If there's anything that you would want to see change and how LAPD works with, I mean, I agree with you on having consistency of officers in SNL. Is there something else that you would, it's like if I could, wave a magic wand, this is what we would want LAPD to do, and I know that we have great partnership, but I think we also like to hear where we could improve, all right? So if there's anything that you would want to bring up, I think this is a great opportunity.
I think what I will say is that the department has been open to hearing feedback. And so I think what you see is maybe not intervention working more closely, but I think what you're observing is that there's better communication between the mayor's office, the department, and then GRID partners, right? And so that has helped improve. And so we're able to do a lot of fixing in the moment. So when incidents come up, we don't allow things to linger, whether there be, changes that need to happen from the GRID side or from the department side. We've been able to have very fluid communication and tackle those issues together. A challenge for the work, obviously, is the buy-in to the model, right? And so that has to happen from the top of the department, the mayor's office, as well as GRID agencies. How do we we're partners. So for GRID agencies, it's not just a funding stream. For officers, it's often, somebody that you might have arrested 10 years ago is now an interventionist, right? And so it is a constant work to get people to buy into the model. And so that's always going to be a challenge. I don't think that there's a fix. And so I think, it's the communication from the commission, from the chief, down to officers and components within the department about this is a critical part of our public safety system. It's a tool to keep neighborhoods safe. And so I think as long as that continues to be encouraged, it will help us dramatically. Again, it's a challenge for GRID agencies, the turnover of staff, and the same way it's a challenge for the department. And so you have gang officers who are younger and newer that we then have to orientate that, that there's a multifaceted approach to reducing community violence. And so we just have to be consistent, I think is the biggest piece.
That's great to hear, and we'll work on all those things, and I think we're all committed to seeing this model work, so thank you for that.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Garcia.
Thank you.
He doesn't know anything about GRID.
Thank you for that. Really appreciate the mayor and her commitment to ensuring that GRID is fully supported and keeps growing, not only in terms of the financial commitment to the program, but the data component of the program, and obviously to the relationship building and the community engagement part of it as well. So if I can have a set of questions, but if some of them may be answered, if we heard a little bit about the prevention model and how that functions, if we can hear a little bit about the intervention model, maybe what does case management look like on the intervention side versus intervention, and then I'll jump into more questions.
Yeah, it's good to see familiar faces, so it's good to be here. Intervention, as Melvin had mentioned, is pretty much for folks that that are actively engaged in harmful activity, gang involved, or even association, stuff like that. So we have two types of case management. One is family case management, which is folks that are 100% involved and engaged into the strength-based approach that we have as case management. We believe in focusing on the strength-based of an individual, not on negatives. And then we have also transitional client services, which those folks are the folks that have the influence, have some type of engagement within the community, but are not ready for family case management. So we have the case management where folks are ready, and those things are like job readiness, education, or simply of getting documents to apply for jobs and stuff like that, such as Social Security, IDs. It's mind-blowing how many folks are not prepared to come to that type of reality. So when they come and face with us, we prepare them for that. Also, we trade school and stuff like that. And then, but pretty much is kind of not saying what not to do, but just offering alternatives to better positive influences and positive mentalities and positive choices when it comes to case management. And so the difference is that these folks are obviously already engaged. They're on probation, some of them on parole, gang involved. And so we focused on the individual primarily. When in prevention, it's more family case management where the family comes involved, the mother, the parent, the aunt, or whoever's a positive role model. And then we work hand in hand, such as prevention is a younger age, but the approach is working parallel together, understanding there's two different lanes. But if, let's just say the parents are gang members and we're able to facilitate services for the parents, while the preventative measures are focused on the younger siblings and the children. And to ensure that it's a family concept where not one is just singled out, but we approach it together. And then what we do is obviously, one of the main things that we want to make sure we mention when it comes to intervention, we really want to drive the education of cultural awareness and then also empowerment through conscious decision making. Now, understanding that we're the products of our environment and we receive them and how they are, but challenging the perspective and the thinking on how we can become better, right? Because if the individual becomes better, we understand that our communities get better. And so being able to put that on them and then make the choices for themselves through empowering them, I think they become greater and better people. And so it's a domino effect, and so our communities become safer. And so not only do they decisions for themselves, but community engagement. SK, you've been involved, you've done some potential harm in the past, but how can you get involved? How can you become a peace mediator? How can you create conflict resolution between neighboring communities? And so giving them a perspective that they never thought about is one of the things, the grid model that it emphasizes. And then this leadership is now making sure that our communities are being serviced with good quality and challenging type of perspectives. And so, yeah, that's one of the things when it comes to intervention, case management, intervention, working together along with the prevention services and working with our community engagement as well, is because everything intertwines. Community engagement, right? SNL, intervention keeps our community safe, while the community engagement team is able to facilitate services for the community at large, and then also prevention and whatnot. So does that answer the question?
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So you have us as an audience right now, but also there's potentially folks listening now or will listen to it later in a recording, and specifically other officers from throughout the city. A little bit along the lines of the client engagement. What can you share a little bit and really almost a message to the officers in particular who may be listening or will listen? What is it that we would, you all would want officers to understand about the clients that you're serving and how it's a transition where an officer on the ground and in particular maybe a new officer knows of a particular individual as active and then they start to join a program and want to change their lives, and how it's not an overnight thing. If you can share some thoughts on what would be the right approach for
That's a great point. I think we'd like to share a message that young people who have strayed away are redeemable. and thinking that young folks that have the necessary support from their family, from the community, but also nonprofit organizations who have the ability to support this population is extremely important. GRID does not throw anyone away. We believe in second chances, and we understand that folks just need sometimes a little bit longer support and consistencies to allow folks to, one, start to change their mindset. My philosophy has always been, if a person has the ability to recondition themselves for success and change their mindset, inevitably their behavior starts to change. And so that's what GRID is really about, is helping people see their full potential, but also assist them every step of the way. And so what I've seen in my many years in this work is officers who have believed in the model, but also interfaced with young people and watched their transition happen. And oftentimes those young people become advocates of the work or become prevention and intervention service providers. And so I think what's helpful is if we can continue to educate law enforcement officers by the training that we collaborate in, to provide some clarity, but also eliminate the misnomers or the perceptions that officers may have. And I think we're moving in the right direction.
I would just add to that, and I want to invite Danny and Charvel to respond. You know, I think the biggest misnomer about community violence and youth violence that we all have to own as the adults and the leaders in our communities is that young people carry guns because they don't think anyone else can protect them. They carry guns to school because they don't think that the school police will protect them or that the adults at that school can protect them. They carry guns in the neighborhood because they don't think anyone can protect them and that they have to protect themselves. And so, you know, what I want to lift up to law enforcement, how we conduct ourselves when incidents happen in community, whether we're treating the mother of the victim, who that victim may or may not be involved in a gang, when we don't treat them like victims, it sends a message that the department's not there to protect them. So how we, and that's the critical part of incident response in the GRID model. The reason why someone from the mayor's office comes, so LAPD is there, and why a community member comes. It's to signal that the violence that just happened is unacceptable, that we know harm happens. And so I think that's what I would want to communicate, is that even if you know that that person may or may not be involved with a certain community group, we still have to signal as a city, we're here to protect everybody in the city. Because if not, then young people who have access to guns will try to protect themselves.
I think for myself, it's just the word responsibility that comes, and everybody plays a role. Even though we conduct different work, we are all here for the same goal, and that's to have safer communities and provide better quality of life. And so that's my message.
Thank you. In terms of informing and educating the department more on what you all do, are there already avenues and structures that exist? For example, is there a training academy module that you all do? Is there opportunities for you all to, or for officers to learn more about GRID and intervention and any alternative response system at a point of maybe promotion or other opportunities throughout the career?
Yes, so the GRID office and intervention workers are a part of the training academy that happens with officers that are joining the gang units, are already a part of the gang units, to expose them to a part of that solution. Sergeant Childress is sitting behind me, helps orchestrate that on our behalf, but also speaks about the work that he does to officers. He has a no-nonsense approach, but he also provides the education and language from their perspective, which we see to be very helpful. And so we'd like to continue that process. I can tell you in years past when GRID first started, what helped us build a better rapport was we were able to train upwards of 1,000 LAPD officers on the work that happens on the ground, the do's and don'ts. And so what it did was help build a stronger professional understanding with interventionists, but also GRID agencies that's doing work in community. So I'd like us to keep that going so we can build a better rapport across the city.
Thank you. And last question. You mentioned professional standards on the intervention side. Can you share a little bit about what that looks like, what the intervention workers go through, and also sort of the career growth, like any career, right? You start new and you become more senior.
For sure. Well, thank you for that. No, I'm glad you know this work inside and out. There is a professional standards committee that's a part of our training partner that trains all and certifies all of our intervention workers across the city. And so, and I was a founding member of the Professional Standards Committee. And so what we decided, because we were concerned about the lack of professionalism in our early days, is we said, one, we need to professionalize the field, but we also need to level up as it relates to the integrity and expectations of intervention workers on the ground. And so we created 16 standards that the La Vida Training Academy trains to each one of those standards to ensure that every intervention worker understands what the expectations are. I think the other element is ensuring that we create career ladders for interventionists. DM Lane and I have talked about this for years. We have intervention workers that's been around a long time. And oftentimes there are no other opportunities because of their skill set and expertise. So we'd like to expand the opportunity for those folks to be able to serve the community in a different capacity so we can get younger and continue to bring the next generation up. But you have interventionists that have become case managers, program coordinators, supervisors, and also become executive directors. So folks are very resilient. Folks have been around a part of this solution making for many years. And so we see intervention workers continue to grow, train, and develop. And so our goal is to make sure that folks continue to elevate every single day.
Thank you. Commissioner Sanchez-Gordon.
Congratulating all of you for the work that you do. The terms that you're using, interventionalist, violence interruption, reducing community violence, the community engagement with LAPD and LA Unified School District, all of that I think are powerful words, and I think that you don't just use the words, but you apply them in the community, and I congratulate you for that. But there's one thing that I'm not clear about. All of the work that you do is to, as you stated when you opened here, community harm, to prevent community harm. Is there a job training and placement component to all of this? Because one of my mentors is Father Greg Boyle, and he's got a famous, powerful saying where nothing stops a bullet than a job. So is there a job training component to all of this, reducing violence, reducing gang activity, all of this stuff that you talked about, which is fabulous? Is there a possibility of training our youth to get them a job?
Yeah, so, this is something we struggle with, and Melvin and I talk about this. GRID is not intended to, it's an intervention. And so I think even with our GRID agencies, you identify someone who is at a high risk of either being a victim of violence or committing violence, and then you want to hold on to them. But GRID, the model is designed that you're intervening, disrupting patterns, and the goal should then be that you're handing them a warm handoff to a youth development program, to a job training program. Agencies sometimes I want to hold them, I have a relationship, but the model is that you're interrupting and you're intervening. So while GRID, yes, we do hire, what we do is provide summer employment for young people to work at Summer Night Lights. So we hire about 500 to 600 seasonal employees during the summer, so those youth who are working are part of the GRID agencies in terms of the young people they're working with. We provide summer employment. But the idea is that you've done the work with that young person so that they can go to a job program and be productive in that space. And so while GRID itself, Beyond Summer Night Lights, is not doing the job work, it's about, okay, do we have them ready so that they can go to Homeboy, their model is to get people ready for jobs, and right? Or to a Venice Helper, right? So the agencies that do job training. GRID is not a job training program itself beyond what we've described. No, I mean, I would say, I don't think that's our wheelhouse, right? So the program's not intended to be all things. What we're trying to do in the Mayor's Office of Community Safety is to tie together the social safety net. And so what we do know is nonprofits, whether they're being funded to do so or not, have informal networks. And so how do we actually elevate those informal networks where agencies who, I have a young person that needs a job, might call their contact at Homeboy Industries, or they might call their contact at another space in a program at WLCAC, who their expertise is job training, get work readiness. And so I would say that's not in our, we want to stay in our lane and do our piece well, and then create those connections to other nonprofits, to private industries. One of the things that we're doing in the Mayor's Office of Community Safety through our reentry work is, yes, we do have a reentry side. And so how do we get the left side of the house talking to the right side? So how do our GRID agencies know when we're doing job fairs through our reentry programs? It could help their intervention workers as well as their the young people and the families that they work with. So we're really trying to be more of a connector as opposed to replicating services that other nonprofits and other organizations are providing.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure, absolutely.
Just really quick, just to add to Commissioner Garcia. I know when I was working with the GRID office, and talking to law enforcement now, they're very supportive of the program, but one of the things they have brought up is that there's not like the loop of like feedback loop, where like they might refer someone to GRID, but then never find out, what happened to this youth that they received services. And I know that initially there was some sort of talk about being able to provide that feedback. So I'm just wondering how that was going, because the officers are like, we refer, but we don't know what happens to those youth if they receive a service or what follow-up and things like that.
That's a great question, and I'll say we are working to get better at that. There is a formal referral mechanism that we have, and we have regional program managers who are tracking the number of referrals and who goes to what organization. But I think the feedback loop is where we're working to figure out how we can get more productive, but also give PD the feedback. And so we'll continue to try to get better at that. But I'll tell you that LAPD has referred tons of young people on the prevention and intervention side. We just have to now start to define how many of those young people have received the necessary support, but also tighten up the measures where some young people have been referred that don't qualify for GRID services. And so we're continuing to talk through that, but we will get better.
Great, yeah, I just know that's something that was brought up by law enforcement.
For sure.
Thank you. Well, Deputy Mayor Lane, Commander Espinosa, Sergeant Childress, everyone here, thank you again for your leadership, for the fine work that you're doing. I think I speak for everyone here in the commission to say that we welcome any opportunity we may have to join you. We'd like to have a seat at your table. While we appreciate the presentation and the data, everybody up here does a pretty good job of getting out in the field. So as you have events that come up that you think we might be interested in, please let us know. We would love to be there. And if there's any way we can support you, please don't hesitate to ask us. So thank you again. And with that, what I'd like to do is almost noon. Let's take a 10-minute break, come back at 12:10, and we will hear the executive director's report. Thank you. Thank you. Commission meeting will resume. We will now hear agenda item number 4, Executive Director's report relative to the City Council's review of the Police Commission permits. And I have Director Sibley, and I also have Lieutenant Moffett. So gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Hi, good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Lieutenant Scott Moffett. I'm the Commanding Officer of Commission Investigation Division. So on October 15, 2024, the City Council approved a motion by Council Members Rodriguez and Lee that the Board of Police Commissioners report back with recommendations on permits in which the regulatory benefit of a police permit has diminished and no longer seems necessary. As you may have noticed in my report, the overwhelming majority of permits were established in 1958 and for over 65 years have continued with little or no modifications. I believe permitting is an essential component of the city government. It promotes public safety, curtails illegal bad actors, enhances consumer protection, and promotes accountability and transparency. This project presented an excellent opportunity to review the efficacy of each board permit. We identified fundamental keys to the regulatory structure which the city attorney should work towards codifying. Some of these keys are timeliness. Applications must be submitted with adequate time for reviewing paperwork, clarifying deficiencies, and ensuring the availability of adequate resources. Accountability. The city must ensure that those profiting from our spaces and resources are identifiable, adequately accountable, and have taken appropriate safety measures and are properly insured. Resource management. It's suggested that as necessary, the council implement a safety plan that promotes accountability and transparency, ensures proper permitting, and provides a roadmap for first responders should a catastrophe occur. This is particularly essential in large public gatherings, but is useful in virtually all instances of business. Infrastructure cohesion. The city must establish clear guidelines and streamline interdepartmental communication among the various entities involved in the permitting process, which can include fire, building and safety, street services, LADOT, and Parks and Rec, among others. I just want to highlight some specific recommendations within the report. And perhaps I spent a fair amount of time discussing the one-night dance permit. That's generally the large public gathering. That permit has not been updated since 1960. And the code definitely needs clarity. It's a vague code. Back in the 60s, they basically wrote that individuals gathering in a public place for the purpose of dancing require a police permit. I think we need to evolve that verbiage a little bit. And I also suggest that a safety plan would be needed or should be essentially required by the board under rules established by the Board of Police Commissioners. In police work, a lot of times we'll say, things turned out well because of good tactics or because we got lucky. As things are occurring right now in the city of Los Angeles, we are getting lucky every single day. These massive crowd gatherings, it's just a matter of time before we have a crowd surge, active shooter, some kind of serious issue that develops. And if it's I lost my train of thought there, but if it's predictable, it's preventable. There it is. So if it's predictable, it is preventable. And so I would suggest that with proper safety plans in place under the rules established by the board, we could help prevent or mitigate serious injury to people within the crowd. Some other things that identified are carnival permits are generally required unless you're a nonprofit, church group, or a school. And that doesn't make sense to me because if you're having a large public gathering, just because you're a school or a church group doesn't prevent you from having a crowd surge or some kind of mechanical failure on one of the rides or something like that. So I could understand if we want to waive the fees surrounding that because of their benevolent cause, but it doesn't make sense to me that we would not require them to have a permit, just like we would expect from a commercial operator. I'm also requesting that we strengthen current laws specific to the tow industry. If you're not aware, the tow industry, and obviously our insurance rates are reflective of this, is getting hammered by bandit tows that basically hold cars hostage, charge thousands of dollars in fees to the car owners or the insurance companies. And there's not adequate teeth in the law as it exists. I think that requires additional study, but certainly as an example, the ability to impound bandit tow trucks and things like that would help strengthen our ability to address those issues. And then massage. Massage continues to be a cat and mouse game in which prostitution's identified. The owners basically close up shop and open under a cousin's name or a friend's name or something like that. So that continues to be a cat and mouse game for most of the police vice units throughout the city. I'm again requesting that we transfer the responsibility of the responsible hotel ordinance to another city department. And I would encourage the board to support that request and urge city council to transfer that. That is a massive undertaking for police resources, and it would effectively triple the load of permits for CID. So we would effectively have to triple our staff. And it's highly suggested that throughout the city, if we look at the home sharing ordinance, and the Department of Planning has hired 30 people to address the home sharing ordinance, which is effectively the same thing as a responsible hotel ordinance, a registry. And they have 30 people. Housing has now requested that they hire 30 people to address the issues that housing would face in the home sharing ordinance. So similarly, the responsible hotel ordinance is going to require at least 30 people. If we look at New York has an office of 70 people, and that's probably the closest comparison to Los Angeles when we talk about home sharing. They have an office of 70 people. So I don't think LAPD is in a position to hire 70 additional people, including a lot of them having to be sworn for enforcement purposes. And then I discussed at length repealing approximately 26 permits of the 65 reviewed. Most of these are antiquated permits that we just simply do not issue anymore. I would say the only one that we issue to some extent around 200 a year is secondhand sales, and that's those are like booksellers. Somebody selling books would technically be required to have a permit. Somebody selling used clothes like Goodwill is technically required to have a permit. But secondhand sellers, with the exception of jewelers, they're reselling jewelry, they're reselling like pawn shop firearms or reselling automotive parts. Those would be accepted within that repeal. And that's a brief overview of the report. Available for any questions.
Well, Lieutenant, first I want to thank you, Director Sibley, Vice President Shields. We've spoken about this for months. First, thank you for bringing this into the 21st century as it relates to some of these regulations that are here. I really got to understand the depth and breadth of expertise and experience that your staff has when I sat through the permitting orientation that they put on for the council district representatives. And again, thank them for all the hard work that they do. I think you've addressed the items that we've spoken about over the last several months. I think that this all makes sense in terms of streamlining it, but most importantly, making sure that we are hosting events and permitting things with safety in mind. We do know the things that can happen. Unfortunately, for example, as the year opened in New Orleans, just an event. And so we have to be able to address things from a stage collapse to someone purposefully or accidentally driving a vehicle through a crowd. So I have looked through this. I don't have any questions. I'll open it up for my fellow commissioners. But again, thank you all for the hard work you do. You seem to be tasked with the work that perhaps other departments should be doing. But at the end of the day, it's whatever we are responsible for, we have to make sure the safety and security of those events are intact to the level of the threshold of the standards that you've got in place. And I certainly concur. So with that, I'm going to open it up for my fellow commissioners for any comments or questions they might have. Commissioner Garcia.
No questions, just comment. Appreciate the report, both the narrative and the general recommendations around structure and process, but also the breakdown of each individual type of permit. And so I agree with how it's presented. Thank you.
Vice President Shields.
Thank you, and thank you for this comprehensive report, and the color coding also helps, so really appreciate the presentation. But it goes to show kind of like the vast range of permitting that is on your plate. I do have just general concerns about, even from the group where you've kind of like narrowed it down to ones that, you know, should be maintained. I still have concerns that even those aren't ones that absolutely need the police to be the owner of this permitting process. And, you know, and completely agree with you with regards to the hotel ordinance. I think that absolutely should be designated to someone else. And, you know, when I started looking at this report, I started looking around to, you know, just in terms of what the city does with some other things that could potentially raise public safety concerns, such as cannabis establishments. Cannabis establishments are not currently under a police permitting process. They have an entirely other department for cannabis regulations. I'd be very interested to know how many cannabis establishments are in the city versus how many hotels and Airbnbs are in the city, and what that budget is that's provided for that entire department and a commission separately, only dealing with cannabis regulations. And yet that is probably just a subset of what we would be facing with the hotel ordinance and putting all of that here. And I would venture to guess, and as a former prosecutor, I would probably be very accurate in guessing that the cannabis establishments have potentially more of a public safety concern than hotels and Airbnbs. And so to the extent public safety is the only reason that it is falling under the police permitting process, I think that there are other ways to get input about police process, including like having live scan background checks of everyone who is, you know, is being sought as a permit. So there are other ways to get to that background checking and public safety concerns than having it fall under the police department. And interestingly enough, hookah lounges are also not regulated by the police department. They have to register a permit with the Office of Finance. So they have an entire mechanism of you can go in, do it, you know, write a permit. And again, hookah lounges can potentially be just as, if not more so, than like pool halls. Same type of public safety type issues. But I think that there's a way for us to look at all of these. Arcades, are these the things that really the police need to be the leaders in? And again, with all the time that people complain about the police budget being bloated or things that the police and an armed response is not appropriate for, I would put a lot of these police permitting things in that bucket. So, you know, when these issues are communicated to city council, I think using some of these other examples that are already being addressed by other departments is important as a comparison of why is it that the police are the ones that actually have to have this fall, or are other parts in the city capable of having that registration? And the problem I have is a lot of these permits are only as good as what the community knows about them so that they know to register, and then the enforcement piece of it. So if they have a number of these, you know, businesses that are not registered, are they being contacted, or is this voluntary compliance? And so when we're stretching our resources so thinly across things that can really be handled by other departments, it waters down our entire process. I'd rather us pick a handful of things that you really think are public safety driven, like the, you know, unusual non-recurring events, the block parties, all of that, and do a lot of work on that to ensure safety, than have all these ancillary things that can be just a push of a button with another department and have them register their fee. There's no loss of revenue to the city because it just goes with another department. So I just, all of this is just, I don't know if I have a specific question, but I, even with the narrowed approach, given that there are other businesses out there, I would really want us to focus more on the very unique things that are not recurring businesses. They're unusual events, the concerts, the block parties, the carnivals, and all of that, which is much more unusual, and let other parts of the city handle regular business permitting and have the police involved only when there is an actual public safety issue.
So if I can respond to two issues that you raised there. So I don't want to, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that we have a lot of great city partners. Obviously, we work very closely with Department of Transportation, with Street Services, the Fire Department, Office of Finance, all those, even the Planning Department. We work with a lot of these. So for instance, like a valet permit, they need to have a DOT sign off. So DOT is ultimately deciding the traffic plan, where these cars are going to go, and then we make sure where they're going is a properly permitted lot, and that the valet operators are adequately screened so that we're not giving vehicles to car thieves and things like that. So it is an ongoing partnership with various city departments that we are doing. The other component I want to mention is enforcement. So the way it works is a lot of, for instance, massage and things like that, we're supporting other police resources in that. Divisionally, vice units are working towards those things, so they're doing enforcement. We also accept public complaints or even internal city complaints where someone says, hey, I went by this place. I don't think they have, a proper permit. That happens frequently with Office of Finance, for instance. They'll identify a parking lot, and when we identify a parking lot, because it's required for auto parks, and obviously if you go to USC on a Saturday afternoon during a football game, you'll notice that some of those parking lots are not necessarily up to snuff. But the trick is, on a lot of those, there's a significant loss of tax revenue. I think parking occupancy tax in the city of Los Angeles last year was around $120 million. That is significant. So when we can capture those instances and working in conjunction with Office of Finance, it makes a significant impact. That doesn't reflect necessarily immediately into the police budget, but it is important because when people know you're watching, they're going to follow the rules. And so that's part of the regulation, is that ability to certainly make them think you're everywhere. And that's one of the challenges that CID faces.
Thank you. Commissioner Kalanche.
Thank you so much. I agree that we shouldn't, for many of these, we shouldn't have to be the permitting office, but I do agree that we can be the regulation or the oversight or the folks that get called out to investigate. So I agree with Commissioner Shields. The other thing I wanted to bring up is what is the process? So next we're going to shoot this over to City Council. What would be the process? And I guess maybe this is a question for City Attorney to make some of these changes. Is it just through like City Council vote, or does it require something else?
No, those permits are pursuant to the Muni Code, so the Muni Code would have to change to the council. And it has been council historically that has wanted the police department to be responsible for the permitting on certain things. It is very dated. Some of those things like arcades may not exist in the original form, so the enforcement is different. But that's an issue that we've dealt with the commission and the department trying to push back on the additional obligations put on the department to take enforcement and review these things. So it is an ongoing fight, so to speak, as far as trying to ensure that the department's resources are spent on things that are what have been traditionally been enforcement for the police department, as opposed to new ones like tobacco was added a few years ago for the oversight. But it is City Council, to answer your question,
So
and
they
it
would
would
just
be
take
a
a-
discussion with them.
And to change the municipal code is just a straight City Council vote? Is it, and then mayor, on board, or?
Right, that would be the traditional way for the ordinance to be enacted.
Okay, so it's just straight ordinance. Okay. Is this going to full City Council, or is it going to Public Safety Committee? Do you know?
I believe it initially would go to Public Safety Committee for approval, and then it would push on to City Council. But just to follow up on what the city attorney said, so each of these permits was enacted by ordinance. And so obviously the responsible hotel ordinance is a good example
Right.
that basically created these two new requirements of the Board of Police Commissioners. So similarly, they can repeal those through council action. But the challenge is generally seeing across the street at City Council is they often rely on the police department because the police department does have the largest budget. You can accomplish a lot of things with a badge when you go in there and it's a little bit easier to get compliance with a badge. So I think the City Council recognizes that, and that's why occasionally we're overburdened with some of these requirements.
Okay. Well, let us know how we can support. If I know the last time we met with some of the council offices to underscore how this would impact the department or CID. But anything we could do to support, I think we are here to support this effort.
Well, I think, like I said, overhaul is long overdue. I think it's been since 1960s. I don't think we want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. There is some value in regulation, certainly for public safety purposes. But I do believe this is a first step in a fairly long road to getting the ordinances squared away and to really benefit the citizens of Los Angeles.
Thank you. Commissioner Sanchez-Gordon?
I don't have any questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, again, thank you for the very comprehensive report and all the hard work that went into this. I move that we approve the Executive Director's report and transmit to City Council. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you very much. The Commission will now recess into closed session. Thank you.
The Board of Police Commissioners will now recess into closed session to discuss item numbers 5A1 and 5A2 in accordance with Government Code 54957.
The Commission has concluded closed session. We'll have a readout by Executive Director Sibley. Mr. Sibley.
Thank you, Mr. President. So item 5 on the agenda, the closed session agenda items. At the regular meeting of the Board of Police Commissioners on February 4th, 2025, during the closed session, the board made the following findings. So going to item 5A1, which is officer-involved shooting 010-24. For tactics, tactical debrief, 2 police officers, 2. That finding was made by a 5-0 vote. For drawing an exhibition of a firearm, in policy, no further action, 2 police officers, 2. Also by a 5-0 vote. And for lethal use of force, in policy, no further action, 1 police officer, 2, and that was by a vote of 4-1, with Commissioner Calanche being the 1. Going to item 5A2, officer-involved shooting 011-24. For tactics, tactical debrief, 1 commander and 4 police officers, 3. For drawing an exhibition of a firearm, in policy, no further action, 1 police officer, 3. For intermediate use of force, in policy, no further action, 3 police officers, 3. And for lethal use of force, in policy, no further action, 1 police officer, 3. And all of those findings were made by a 5-0 vote. And that concludes the report out, Mr. President.
Thank you. I move that today's meeting be adjourned. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
The meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very much.